evil people can only understand evil, but good people can understand evil and good, because through the pursuit of goodness, they see the potential pitfalls of evil. But for evil people, I think this is so important, and I think people don't realize this. Trump revealed something truly surprising in that the Overton window, I don't know if there's any Republican in a moderate state that would have been brave enough to say,
I don't think she was in bed. She was in the hallway, wasn't she?
yes.
That doesn't, I don't think that substantively changes.
So here's why it was, okay? And I hate to put you on the spot. I'm only doing this to prove a point, and it's nothing personal about you. But
Sure.
do you know how the shooting started with the Breonna Taylor incident?
I have not read all your manifesto.
Well, that's good. It's mostly a waste of time. You're fine.
No, I mean, it sounds like pretty successful. I've been asked questions by buddies of mine who introduced me to you. What do you think about this? And for some reason, I thought you were working on a project that was going to describe like all your political positions, like on a policy basis. Did you ever say you were going to do that?
I said I was going to get some of them out there, mainly related to trans stuff, just so there was like a clear line of like what I believed in relating to, trans stuff.
So is that what the manifesto essentially became?
Well, no, it became a much larger project that included gripes I had with how people mischaracterized me and other stuff. So,
gotcha. The bit I did listen to just independently, because I work from home, so I have a lot of stuff going on in the background. You, Dylan Burns, Econoboy, Brian Tyler Cohen, all these people, just depending on what's going on. I did listen, because I think you broke it up into like separate videos. I listened to the one where you were relaying like I think it was like personal testimony from your trans fans or trans people who had been introduced to you, and basically affirming a lot of the advocacy that you do, that's different from the stuff that goes on with, I don't know, other online lefties. So I did listen to that, thought that was pretty interesting, but that's about it.
okay.
So the basically my limited exposure from that video, and also from your conversation with President Sunday. And most of that conversation, I thought it was pretty interesting. And then where I really got hooked was around like the 1 minute and 30 second, no, excuse me, the 1 hour and 30 minute mark, when you made the comment about Nazis.
Mm-hmm.
So, do you remember the particular one I'm talking about?
If I can remember from your message, it was something about how I don't ever want to use like lies to sell a political ideology.
Yeah. So the exact quote was, "I can't lie for the purposes of creating a political ideology, because at that point, and you can quote me, I would rather Nazis take over the country if it was just the case that there was no way to do LGBTQ argumentation without either engaging in lies, or that like anybody sees a fascist argument, they automatically turn into a Nazi." Mm-hmm. And to me, that was a turning point in the conversation, which I found really interesting, because you and I have talked once before on stream, and I really enjoyed the conversation, but it was kind of related to that idea, which is kind of expectations for honest discourse from the right and the left. So I thought that was a nice kind of recurring theme. But before we get into the Sunday thing, for the benefit of your audience, or to whatever degree it matters to you, which it probably doesn't, I just want to make a couple of concessions to you right out the gate, so that way you know where I stand on this.
Okay.
The big one is I don't think you're a Nazi.
Wow, thanks.
So,
big concession.
Hey, yeah, it's huge. I know you can like frame that, put that on the wall. I also don't think you're right wing. I think that you are still a lefty, and that's part of the reason why I still follow you, why I still listen to a lot of your content, and why I engage with you, or attempt to engage with you as much as I do. I just think that a lot of this owes to trauma from hostility that you've received from other online lefties. So I try to be cognizant of that.
Okay.
And given that you've been the subject of death threats, defamation, and personal attacks, and threats against your family, and all this crap, plus attempts to kill your finances, I understand that trauma is like perfectly, like, I cannot even imagine.
I'm fine. But okay, go. Let's go. Yeah. What are we talking about? Okay. You're fine.
So, all right. Well, then here it is. So, when you say that you have a preference, you don't want either of these things to happen, but if given the option between these two things, you would prefer Nazis to take over the country, then either engage in lies for LGBTQ advocacy, or kind of give cover to lies from LGBTQ activists. I was blown away that you would ever utter that, because my understanding is, and correct me if I'm wrong, don't you like believe in like harm reduction as a principle? Like, isn't that something that you've said before? That
Yeah, of course.
Okay. How do you square that? How do you square that utterance with harm reductionist principles or utilitarian principles?
Because sacrificing valid epistemology would be one of the biggest harms I think you could ever commit, is entering a world where anything can be true or anything can be false, depending on what political ideology or moral or ethic we're trying to push. I think that'd be one of the worst things we could do.
Do you think that that would be done by tolerating or engaging in, like, surely you don't think that, I guess, I don't want to say this. I don't know of any political activist or politician or commentator or pundit who is perfectly honest, right? So
There's a difference between making a mistake versus being dishonest out of principle.
do you think that the people that you have issues with, like Vosh or whoever you're thinking of when you wrote this manifesto, when this like caused the conversation with Sunday, do you?
Yeah, Vosh is explicitly can be dishonest by principle if he thinks it'll further his political ideology, yes.
Do you think that that is something that Nazis do?
Almost certainly, sure.
Okay, so then how do you square these two things? Because if here's what I'm thinking. I don't think there is such a thing as an honest Nazi. I mean, especially
Yeah, they're definitely out there. I've argued with them. But maybe the confusion is that because of the way that I uttered this phrase, maybe the confusion is that I'm making this implication that like Nazis are these honest actors and progressives lie sometimes. So, you know, there are many possible worlds where I'm siding with Nazis over progressives. I don't think that's the case. I think that the people on the right tend to lie more than the people on the left. That's why most of my positions are left-leaning, and I can't see a world where Nazis are making better arguments than progressives, because if that was possible, then I would probably just be a Nazi. But
sure.
But I'm
you're
saying
not.
that like yeah, but I don't believe in the concept of like bending truth or, you know, having different epistemic values because they suit some political end. And other people seem to be more than willing to make those sacrifices. Or it seems that like progressives in general epistemically have shifted away from arguments of like fact into just arguments of like social expediency, like what furthers our progressive values the most, and then that becomes the foundation for what is true. And the trans issue is a good place to explore that, right? Like, well, what does it mean to be trans? It's if you ID as trans. Why? Because that's what makes most people happy. Like, we are talking about something that there was a fact of the matter about, and now we've shifted to like, well, the fact of the matter is whatever like makes us feel good, which I think is an unacceptable. I think that's just an unacceptable epistemic foundation to live off of.
Well, and I don't follow, like, of all my policy like interests and whatnot, and trans issues is towards like I paid the least attention or among the least attention to it because I'm quite frankly out of my depth on it. But my understanding was it wasn't, you know, you're necessarily trans if you feel like it. My understanding was you take a person at face value when they tell you that.
It used to be that, but it morphed into something different. Now you're trans if you say you're trans. There is no underlying fact of the matter. It's just you uttering the statement is what makes you trans.
So to be clear, people on the online are saying, listen, if a person says they're trans, they are automatically trans simply by saying it.
Yes.
It's not.
It sounds stupid and it sounds strawmanny. I encourage you to talk to other people because the position sounds so incoherent that it seems like it's not true. But yes, that is the position now.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Okay. So I guess what I would just kind of circle back to is, so when you say that they're honest Nazis, the reason I would say that they're not there might be people who are blatantly Nazis, but when I say honest, I mean, isn't Nazi ideology predicated like on one falsehood after another? Like, Jews are responsible for World War I, post-World War I era Germany's plight, the Aryan race is genetically superior, you know, marginalized groups, Jews, gypsies, you know, black people, blah, 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 they're genetically inferior.
Yeah, there are probably forms of Nazism that are predicated on that, sure, yeah. But there could also be people that we call Nazis today who are just like, I want, you know, like they'd be more akin to like white nationalists or white separatists, right? And they might still be Nazis because maybe they also don't like Jewish people, but, you know, maybe like, I don't know if they have like a big conspiracy or not, but they definitely all advocate for themselves, and I don't like that in my society. In which case, you might call those people Nazis, but it's not necessarily predicated on falsehood. But I mean, a lot of it probably is. Most of it probably is, right?
Right. And I appreciate you acknowledging that because to me it's like, okay, well then if that's the case, if either like the thing that was the fountainhead of Nazi ideology, so like, you know, early 20s, 30s, 40s German ideology, and then it became kind of a more bargain bin, you know, generic variety of white supremacy. If that is all, or if there are huge strains of dishonesty inherent to that ideology, I still don't understand how you would state that preference, because even if that's the case, it seems to me that the people that you take a particular issue with overall are still less dishonest.
Yeah, potentially. I mean, it's kind of like, we don't really have a disagreement here. Maybe like, it would be like me saying like I would prefer an honest communist to I would utter the statement, I prefer an honest communist to a dishonest social democrat, even though I think that like communism is predicated on economic ideology that is kind of fantastical. And
Sure.
so somebody might say like, well, isn't there no such thing as an honest communist because they make these claims about the economy that could never be true, or a bad analysis? Like, yeah, sure, but like, you understand what I'm saying, I guess. I'm sure there are some communists out there that are more realistic with their evaluations or whatever. But in general, communism almost necessarily like implies some level of misunderstanding or something that you don't get about how economies work. Same thing with Nazism, probably almost intrinsically has some level of like misunderstanding of like Jewish conspiracy theories or racial superiority or whatever. Sure, it's probably baked into it almost. Yeah.
Gotcha. Well, so I remember, and you may have the deets, you know, you may have a finer recollection than I do, and I can't remember who the hell you talked to, but this was like a year or two ago. There was something about, I think it was something about Hassan, where you were talking about, you know, respect for people living their principles, and it may have been Vosh that you were talking to, and I understood and was sympathetic to your argument at the time, which was, you advocate for people living their principles. I think that's perfectly admirable, and I recall being
and when it comes to like
side.
online stuff, there's basically no congruence between a person's political positions and how a person acts in their personal life. I can't tell the difference. If you show me a person's actions and then you ask me to predict what their political beliefs are, I'm not going to be able to tell you ever. You're not going to be able to make that determination.
And fair enough. And I recall that being in the context of Hassan, and I completely agree that.
Or any of these online political figures, or anybody that works in entertainment. Sorry, go ahead.
Well, but what's interesting is, so like the example you use in this conversation was like you would prefer an honest communist to a dishonest social democrat, and you laid out your reasons beautifully. But to me, it's not even so much. Well, look, I guess first I would ask you, do you think communism is inherently, I don't even know if you use these terms, and so but like evil? Like, do you think communism is inherently bad?
I don't think I'd ever say evil.
Harmful?
Bad, maybe, like bad for like things, but I don't know if I'd say evil.
Okay, but like, do you think it's inherently so, like inherent to the ideology?
Yeah, I would say the analyses are like fundamentally broken. Yeah.
Okay. So not just wrong, not just quote unquote fantastical, but like you basically run communism through 100 simulations in the vast majority.
And it fails 98 of them, yeah.
Okay.
Or more.
What about Nazism?
Probably similar.
Would you say meaningfully worse?
Worse, like morally or ethically. Nazis might make better predictions about human behavior or economies than communists will, but I don't know if Nazism necessarily, if it necessitates like a certain mode of economy. Like, I think you can have a Nazi that is probably like a communist, right? Like people that are third positionists.
So the reason I ask is because, you know, that example that you gave, I was thinking of something else. What about like what about somebody who wants to commit mass murder, or something that we would consider inherently bad or whatnot, or ethically bad or whatever? And from the last conversation that we had, and I want to reiterate this, I am not a philosopher. I am more of like a policy wonk than anything else. So just right out the gate, I am about as clumsy as it gets in philosophy. So some of this we're probably just gonna have to talk through, and feel free to correct me. But I think of something, and I imagine you would too, in whatever adjective you want to use, mass murder is bad.
Yeah, of course.
And so, right. So, I'm going to throw that on another concession, that you are anti-mass murder. So, thank you. Appreciate that.
No problem.
So a person who like promises to commit mass murder and follows through with it, you would agree that person is worse than somebody who says that they're going to commit mass murder and never does, right?
Yeah, most certainly, yeah.
So, and again, because I'm not philosophical, so help me out here. So why is it that, you know, in one situation you would prefer an honest communist to a dishonest social democrat, but presumably you would not prefer an honest mass murderer to a dishonest person who doesn't commit mass murder. Like seems to me like in certain situations, honesty is no longer the like final arbiter for you in what.
No, it's not. I think you're reading too far into my statement that like honesty is by far like the most important possible thing that could ever. Oh, well, no, never mind. I guess that's your point, is that I made it sound like the final arbiter when I said I prefer an honest Nazi to a dishonest whatever other person.
Correct.
Yeah, and I guess the more elaborate version, or the version that makes more sense of what I was saying, is that if there is a certain political ideology, I guess, that necessitates dishonesty, I would abandon that political ideology. I guess the way that I phrase it is pretty sloppy, because it makes it sound like if there were a whole bunch of well-meaning people that like lied a little bit, I would prefer the genocidal people to that group of people. That's probably not the case, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, sure. That's true. But I guess the flip side was, if there was some political ideology that was like honest all the time, and there was another political ideology that required some level of dishonesty to function, I'm almost always going to go towards the more like logically coherent ideology.
Fair enough. Okay. And then, and I appreciate that, because that kind of does help clarify for me. I assumed that was the case. You know, I don't, when you said it, it kind of surprised me, but then it's like,
yeah, I understand. Yeah, because it sounds like the other one is that like, yeah, for sure. That makes sense. Yeah. Yeah. So like if I were to say like I would prefer living with an honest rapist than a dishonest person that like steals, $5 from my wallet every month, that's probably not going to be the case, right?
Probably not. And hopefully you'll never be in that choice. But, I remember Sunday, and I don't know much about who Nick Fuentes is. Is he associated with Turning Point USA?
No.
Or is that's Charlie Kirk?
Yeah, that's Charlie Kirk. They're a different faction.
Gotcha. Okay. So I know like your friendship with like Lauren Southern has lasted much longer. You put out more content pertaining to that, so I'm more knowledgeable about that. And I do want to say that, and I don't know where Sunday is on this, but he seemed to suggest otherwise, but I've always taken, at least in theory, your interactions with right-wingers to be kind of like, you know who Daryl Davis is?
Yeah.
Okay. That's how I've always looked at your like engagement with right-wingers, as kind of like a less formal, more online version of that. Is that fair?
Yeah, if you want to take it that way, sure.
But I mean, like, what I mean is, so like, do you, when you create like these friendships, or I don't even know if you describe Fuentes as a friend, but I assume your friends, you consider like Lauren Southern a friend, but is the friendship separate or in service to an attempt to de-radicalize her and her audience?
No, at this point, the friendship is just because I need some kind of friends in my life, and I couldn't make any on the left, so.
Gotcha.
Again, at this point in my life, I separate people's political ideologies out almost completely from their personal behavior, because I find that the two have absolutely nothing to do with one another.
Oh, so that works for the rights, what you're saying. So like,
it works on all sides. Yeah. Like if you show me like a progressive and you show me like a conservative, and then you ask me like which one are you more likely to be friends with, I would say I honestly can't make a prediction. I have to interact with them on a personal level and then see what kind of people they are, and then that's how I'll be able to tell.
So is in your interactions with people like Hassan or Vosh compared to Lauren Southern, would you say like, even though the thing she advocates for, you obviously from a policy perspective and general positioning, you disagree with them far more, but would you say she is in person, she's more
a better
moderate?
Human being? I would say she's a better human being. Like more moderate politically, absolutely not, but like a better person. I could never ever be like friends with somebody like Hassan, or probably somebody like Vosh ever, because I don't consider these people to be good people. But what the bar for what most people consider to be like good people or not tends to be like their political views. But like I said, I've interacted with so many people at this point with different types of political views that are completely incongruent with their personal actions that I just don't consider it very important anymore.
Okay. So it's not, sure I understand this correct. So it's not necessarily that Vosh and Hassan, you consider them bad because their views are incongruent.
Correct. I consider them bad on a personal level. I just think they're shitty people.
I see. Okay. Well, you basically, I mean, ran through the crux of it for me because, I mean, obviously I don't know Bosch, Hassan, or Lauren Southern personally, but most of my disagreement with you is about the Nazi thing. We cleared that up pretty quick. Before I go, though, I'd like to run one other thing by you and just kind of like vibe check. So I'm going to be having a conversation with not so erudite and a couple of she's going to be moderating a discussion for a couple of us on Tuesday, and I'm trying to take very careful notes here because I had a really, really, really bad interaction with Rob Noor.
Yeah, he's really aggressive. Yeah.
Well, it was, yeah, he was super aggressive, but also like I was shocked at how ill prepared I was. I thought it was going to be like kind of an organic conversation like I've been having with you.
Oh yeah, you have to be really prepared when you're talking to him. He'll have all of his like facts and figures out.
Oh my god, yeah. I mean, like he just steamrolled me. It was brutal. And I mean, I was like, yeah, number one, completely underestimated you and the tone and everything else, and I was just not ill prepared for it. It's humiliating. So like I'm trying to be a bit more proactive. I try to like recall and have sources available and stuff like this, but I typically don't make a ton of notes when I go into conversations, but that taught me to at least have some on standby. And so the topic of the conversation concerns, you know, what we think that morally responsible eligible voters should do in the next election, like 2024 or 2022 midterms, 2024, and all that. And I'm very anti-Republican, like I'm very anti-GOP, so I think that, you know, every morally eligible, responsible voter should vote Democrat until the GOP is basically crushed, or at least this particular strain of it. And part of the conversation, like the prep for it, because I try to avoid gotchas and everything else, we had this really nice private conversation about what our general positions are, and I think it's going to be really, really good faith, so I'm excited for it. But one of the predicates to the conversation, one of the premises that there is you're going to hate this word, it's your least favorite F word, but whether or not there is a fascist strain to the Republican Party. Not necessarily is the Republican Party fascist, but whether or not there's a fascist strain to it.
Sure.
And I remember that this was almost like a trigger word for you in the last...
It's a trigger word because people apply it incorrectly, don't understand what it is, but it's undeniably true. The Republican Party been really heavy populist post-Trump, and then their respect for the rule of law has been almost non-existent, and the way that they go about trying to exercise their political power like completely resembles what you would expect a fascist to do. Things like undermining elections, things like attacking freedom of the press, things like trying to get around your electoral processes to win like these are all like this is like not even like controversially fascist. Like it's like I wouldn't even like take anybody serious that didn't just like immediately accept it, like, yeah, for sure these are like fascist tendencies, of course. Yeah,
fair enough.
I mean, we literally have not by process lost part of like one of the most important branches of government, our Supreme Court, because Republicans like broke a norm and denied us a Supreme Court pick. Like,
right,
that's a pretty big deal.
No, it is. And again, you and I talked about some of this the last time we talked, so I think we're kind of on the same page. I am surprised. I mean, I was looking at like Robert Paxton and Umberto Eco, you know, these historians
losers.
who...
But sorry, yeah. No, I'm just
kidding. You say losers?
Yeah, sorry, go ahead. People always
you
bring
think
up
they're losers?
No, it's just people will bring up like the 14 points of fascism, but they're like the way that they're laid out in like these little memes are so vague that it's like one will be like dehumanizing opponents, and it's like literally every single person in politics does this. Like it's not a... But yeah.
Well, so if we really want to get technical, to your point, like I think you made this point on some sort of panel, but basically that a lot of political advocates or a lot of political parties have or do or will at one point or another technically employ tactics or things that we would associate with fascism. So I think that's one of them, for example. Yes, I do agree that you know, you can find people on the left, certainly online and probably like on the fringes in public, that would, you know, quote unquote dehumanize Republicans or conservatives or whatnot. So I mean, fair point. But do you think that the 14 points are not like do you not think that there's like substance to historians like Paxton and Eco in terms of their dissections of fascism?
I mean, there could be. I just like just when we're making like political observations and shit, just
Sure.
give me an observation that's useful, that gives me some action I can take as a result of it. Like that's the whole point. Like the problem is that like every single word we use politically is just basically one's picked or one's chosen for moral weight or gravity. So like
Sure.
fascist becomes synonymous with bad, and then it means nothing, right?
Right.
Like if I were to ask somebody,
Well, you've been called a fascist, right? I mean,
yeah, but it's by stupid people that don't know what it means or what the point is, right? Like
Right,
if I
but
were
I
to
mean, to
ask
the
somebody,
point-
here's like the big killer question. You can do this to anybody that uses these terms so loosely, right? Like, okay, you said this person is a fascist. So what? Why is fascism even bad? And the answer they're going to give you is going to be something along the lines of, well, it threatens minorities or something. It'll be some stupid answer like that. People won't even be able to tell you why fascism is bad. And if they don't have an answer to why it's bad, then why the fuck are you even using the word as a pejorative if it could be anything, right? Because there are forms of fascism that I imagine like lefties would be okay with. And in some roundabout ways, they kind of act a little bit fascist with their engagement of different institutions as well. So, I mean, like, yeah, the word fascist is kind of pointless because from the description of fascism, I can't lay out any clear action you should be taking because people just don't even know what it means or what it entails or how to combat it or if it even should be combated.
Well, and that's interesting because I'll be honest with you. I mean, you saying this, I've never really pondered that question myself. And if I had to on the fly, I would say just that it, historically and contemporaneously, fascism, at least serious fascism that has more than just a couple of traits associated with it, tend to be correlated to like really bad moral or policy outcomes where minorities are disenfranchised, where rule of law is eroded, where
But fascism
democratic-
could be based, right? You could theoretically, maybe not true pure fascism. Fascism usually implies some level of racial purity, but we could have like an ultra nationalist country that's like diverse, like a multi like ethnic country that is like treated in a fascist manner, where that's treated as like the constituents of the country, right? Like, oh, like we have a fascist country, but our ethnicity is like diversity or multiculturalism, and then from there we can have like an authoritarian regime that has a totalitarian rule. They control all aspects of like the media, the schools, and everything else. They enact policy through single party. They have no respect for democratic processes or institutions. Like more or less, it'll hit like every other part of being quote unquote fascist. They just won't. They just miss that one like racial purity bend. And in that case, I think there are a lot of people on the left that would actually be like pretty chill with that. And I know people get triggered when they bring this up, but like when they talk about like wanting to change all of our different democratic processes, like massively change gerrymandering, massively change the structure of the Supreme Court, massively change the structure of the Senate, the Electoral College. I'm not saying that any of those things on their own are necessarily bad, or even that all of those things changed are necessarily bad. But whenever people start focusing more on the processes and changing the processes than changing minds, that feels like an ultra kind of populist or quote unquote fascist kind of thing to me. But.
Yeah, so I mean, I guess I know that populism is again pretty correlated with fascism. I don't know if I would consider them synonymous, but certainly there's like a populist element to the left, right? No doubt about it.
I think populism is like you walk to populism, you walk away from reason, and then you go to populism, and then when you keep walking in that direction, you get to fascism. That's essentially what happens.
Well, so again, you're saying this, and it's interesting because, of course, like gerrymandering is a great example. So both Democrats and Republicans obviously engage in rampant gerrymandering. I would say that Republicans have been generally more egregious with it and more successful. Like, I think you're more likely to see, state and federal courts strike down, gerrymandered, voting maps and whatnot, because the right tends to overreach and do it like more, blatantly. Mm-hmm. But as a Democrat, I'm fine with Democrats gerrymandering. So, like, to your point, right? So, like, gerrymandering.
Yeah. So that's the
like,
bad thing, right? Is when we weaponize the process, right? So, like, imagine we have a society where we want the best fighter to win, right?
Sure.
There's two ways that we can make our fighter win. We can either give him better training, better diet, nutrition, exercise, all of that, or we can try to like change the arena, right? Maybe we can add some spikes to the floor on the other side, put some oil down so the dude slips. Creating like the best fighter, I think, should always be the goal. Like changing hearts and changing minds, getting your political ideology out, and then the political institutions become the conduit through which you make that change. But if you're just focused on the institutions and trying to change them to your will, then it feels like you're basically admitting that like you can't change the hearts and minds. You have to change the process to better suit you.
Well, I think in this political context, we got to do both, right? I mean, like, I don't think they're mutually exclusive. I think
Not necessarily, yeah. But there's definitely
I think
hyperfixation on the process, assuming that like everybody else is unchangeable. That's the issue, is that everybody feels like people on the left, call everybody on the right a fascist, racist, white supremacist. People on the right call everybody on the left an LGBT, transing the children groomers. Like,
well, no, I mean, like, there's certainly been a coarsening of the dialogue. There's no doubt about that. And two, I hate to use this trope because, again, I think one side does it considerably more egregiously than the other. But I will say, quote unquote, on both sides. But I see there again. I don't know if it's that the left in general thinks that the right in general is immovable. It's just that I think that, you're a testament to this. Part of the reason why I still follow you is you have examples throughout however long your advocacy has been, where you have de-radicalized people on the right. So clearly, people's minds can be changed. It's to me, it's a question of probability on a mass scale, because I think you can easily make the argument that in addition to the Republican Party having a very virulent strain of fascism running through it, it's also like really culty, the party itself. So I mean, like you look at polls. Jesus, after
it is right now because of Trump. Trump changed things a lot with the Republican Party. I don't know how, but yeah.
No, I mean 100%. So like, I don't think it's at the same time. While a better political world or a more ideal political world would be like this Aaron Sorkin West Wing style, exchange of opinions, which I would ideally want, and what sounds like you're advocating for too. That doesn't exist, and that really can't exist, can it? Until that strain of the Republican Party doesn't want a fair fight.
Well, it seems like nobody does now because everybody's convinced that everybody else is unchangeable and immovable. Except Biden, because Biden's based. He's trying to move people, but...
He is. I mean, he and Manchin, I don't know if you... Because I know you've been out, or traveling or whatever it is that you're doing, but I don't know if you got the news, but Manchin and Schumer have reached like a tentative deal for, a major social spending element to like Build Back Better, like... it's going to have like climate change reduction in it and closing tax loopholes and all these things. He completely fucking sandbagged Mitch McConnell. Mm-hmm. And have you heard about any of this?
I've read headlines, but I don't know what happened.
Oh, dude, dive into it. It's fascinating. It's like that was for a brief, beautiful, shining moment. I like Joe Manchin because he stuck it to McConnell and made a deal with Schumer. Mm-hmm. We'll see if it lasts because obviously you got to get Kirsten Sinema on board, and she is like not signaled any sort of enthusiasm towards it, but to your point though, as far as like both sides not wanting a fair fight, it's not a fair fight, and I think so for example, you said again probably like 3 months ago in a conversation with somebody about how I think it actually precipitated our first conversation. You said that the left is anti-democratic, and one of the examples you gave is that the left wants to get rid of the electoral college.
Yeah,
that's not anti-democratic.
Sure. The goal, when I'm pointing this out, I want to focus on what I said before, because I said earlier, getting rid of it doesn't necessarily make you anti-democratic. It's just the fixation on changing the institutions rather than trying to change hearts and minds. There might be some institutions that legitimately should be changed. Maybe the electoral college shouldn't exist because we already have disproportionate representation in both the Senate and the House for individual states and for individual voters in those states. So maybe the electoral college should actually be just a straight popular vote. That could be a thing. That wouldn't necessarily be anti-democratic. It's when I see people that are hyper fixated on breaking the processes rather than working through them. Like, I believe that for a society to function, I think that we have to become something greater than a collection of people that just make deals with each other, right? We have to create institutions that we entrust with certain powers to guide and direct society that are necessary for society to function with large groups of people that could theoretically disagree with each other to work together. And one of those institutions might be the institution through which we pass legislation, because everybody in this country might have a different idea about what an abortion right looks like or what crime looks like in a million aspects, and we have to be able to trust these institutions to work even when we disagree with them. And the way that you work these institutions, assuming they're working well, is to get people in there that you agree with by voting. But when you start trying to break the institutions down, what you're getting is you're usually getting people that are trying to exercise their will over other people through non-democratic processes by breaking those institutions. And once that begins to happen, then society is lost. Have you watched like The Boys?
Oh, love it. Yep. I
haven't read the comics. Am I wrong on this? Are they going to have to become permanent superheroes to not die? Is that going to happen? That might be a big spoiler.
The implication from the last season, there's spoilers. I haven't read. I'm not a comic book guy either, but I do love the TV show. The implication does seem to be like the temporary usage of Compound V is fatal, especially if you use it more than once.
Gotcha. It makes it sound like to me that like they're gonna have to become superheroes to not die. That'd be my guess. But I don't know. Who knows? But like, let's say that is the case, right? In that show, you kind of have this strange thing where there's a certain evil that you want to destroy, and can you become that evil to destroy it, or in the process of becoming evil, do you lose something, right? That makes it so that whatever world you're building afterwards is not going to be right because you've sacrificed too much to get there. Does that make sense?
No, it makes perfect sense, and I think that's a great ethical dilemma in the show. But I would also say that a couple of things. I mean, to me, it's and not that you're suggesting it's a perfect analogy, but one of the things that make that analogy meaningfully imperfect is the fact that you do have the presence of other superheroes or supes or whatever who are like, it's not just the quote unquote boys. They have some heavy hitters who are able to fight back. And it's also true that while there is like an existential risk to them using Compound V, the case is also made that if they don't, I mean, Homelander will paste them in 0.5 seconds. And Homelander to me is really interesting because, of course, did you watch this season all the way through?
Yeah, I've seen everything. Yeah. So
like you saw, it was not particularly subtle, but it was there, and I think it was well done. Like the obvious, far right, alt right, right-leaning populism that's in like part of Homelander's character.
Yeah, of course, it's literally Trump, right? Yeah, that's who he's supposed to be. Yeah,
but see that to me, like that's an interesting ethical question, and it could be possible that somebody who abuses Compound V could become the next Homelander, or the next Trump, whatever, or something worse. But like, okay, well, what's the alternative? Like, if I were to ask you, Destiny, what would be a more nuanced approach that says that?
Yeah, I understand what you're asking me. I don't have the answer for you. Do you watch anime? Old anime?
I do not. I'm not an anime guy.
You've never heard of like Rurouni Kenshin or Gundam Wing or any of these old?
I've heard of Gundam Wing. I watched Sailor Moon as a lead into the TV show Reboot when I was a kid.
Gotcha. There's always like these. Damn, I wonder if there's got to be more contemporary examples, but like, maybe you can argue Attack on Titan kind of deals with it. But like, there's always this thing where you have like a great evil, but usually for a protagonist in Japanese media, especially being so influenced by World War II and everything afterwards, there's always these huge divides on like, is peace achieved through immoral means, like a true virtuous form of peace, or is it going to be doomed to fail because of the lack of virtue that you use to pursue it? I'm falling on the side right now of no, but I don't know if I can argue that. Like that these seem like highly philosophical positions. Like in Gundam Wing, like one of the characters, Wu Fei, in the final movie, like he's upset that they quote unquote achieved peace throughout the world, but they did it using huge mechs that like blew a bunch of people up and killed a bunch of people. So his thing was always like, peace achieved through combat and violence and murder can never be called true peace, and it's going to lead to like a repeat of the three beats of peace, war, and revolution, and blah blah blah. It's like always going to repeat because of this. Or in Rurouni Kenshin, the main character is a pacifist, kind of, which is interesting. When he quote unquote attacks people or kills people, he doesn't kill them, he just injures them so that they can't fight anymore. But it works out conveniently in the show that these people just never end up catching up with them. And what would happen if they kept coming back over and over again and killed them? Like, I don't know. Yeah, I wish I had like a good answer for you there. But yeah, I don't know. I guess like the dream is that there's some virtue or nobility or goodness in doing things properly, and hopefully the virtue of that process will bleed over into other parts of what you're doing that make it work ultimately against like an unvirtuous actor. But maybe that's not the case, and maybe I'm too naive, and maybe you do have to fight fire with fire or something. I'm not sure.
Again, I think like articulating these things is perfectly reasonable, because I do think in any movement you have to have a lower C conservative part that's like kind of like the brake check. Mm-hmm. And if that's your function for the left, I don't and have never had a problem with that. But to me, and I would never describe you as naive, but I guess where I would question is, you put so much emphasis on, to me this seems like I use the expression, a knife fight for the future of this country. Mm-hmm. And through this country, which is the most powerful and influential in the world, ultimately global hegemony itself, right?
Sure.
And so it's like you are putting so much emphasis on the conduct of the disadvantaged party, because while it is true that there are democratic like, the Republican Party's only won a popular presidential vote once in the past 30 years. Generally speaking, Democrats are more popular overall in terms of numbers, and their policy prescriptions have a better record in modern history. Democrats make more jobs, they contribute less to
Yeah, they have to pull,
deficits.
especially after the past like 2 decades, they have to like pull the economy back out of whatever ungodly hellhole the Republican before them plunged it into and shit. Yeah, whether it was
100%.
a recession with Bush, the global recession, or whether it was with Trump, the mishandling of the coronavirus and everything. But yeah.
Well, even a recession from Reagan. I mean, so because you saw that was where Clinton really got, and was very successful. I mean, it is true that George H.W. Bush started to preside over the upswing, and then Clinton took it even further, and all these things. So like you've got Reagan, W. Bush, and then Trump, and then modern history has been the Democrats that follow these presidents have had to
pick up the pieces. Yeah.
But what's interesting is that despite that, in so many ways, Democrats are incredibly disadvantaged. I mean, and I don't know if we talked about this last time, but people expect more out of Democrats. Like, Democrats expect more out of Democrats.
Yeah, more
moderates
for sure.
and centrists.
Like, you look at somebody like Trump and the tapes that leak about him, and then you look at like Al Franken getting kicked out of Congress or the Senate. Yeah, it's insane.
Yeah, 100%. But I would argue, I mean, don't you contribute to that too, to an extent? Like, you expect.
Yeah. So the question is, and I'm so confused in life right now. I'm sorry. Maybe I'm like 6 months old about answer, dude. But like, it feels like my hope, and this might be naive, or I've just been too Christian lately or whatever. My hope is that carrying forward some virtue or carrying forward some way of being will bleed out into other parts of your life, your existence, your institutions, your communities, and your parties, and that through some moral authority, you'll be able to win those battles in wherever you need to. Maybe that's not the case, and maybe that is a super naive thought. I hope that is true, but it could be that in 6 months I think about this one, I'm like, you know what, this is stupid. Like, you should just fight fire with fire, nuke them if you need to, political asset, whatever crazy shit I guess is gonna come. But like, yeah, I don't know. Maybe that is. This is like it's not even a philosophical argument of like, just thought experiments. It's almost like an ethical position. I don't know how to. Yeah, I don't know.
No,
I don't know
well,
what the answer is. Yeah.
Well,
like some people, like I read an article that was interesting that one of the reasons why we were successful in Ukraine was because in some ways the United States and the West had the moral authority for Ukraine's existence. Like, it was right that Ukraine existed. It was recognized. The rest of the world saw that. And through that moral authority, we were able to funnel so much more support into Ukraine than what really anybody ever thought possible. And then Russia's, kind of stumbling falls on their lack of moral authority as well. But maybe that's not the case. Yeah.
Well, it may just be possible that sometimes your hope will manifest and other times it won't. I think that's a more reasonable assumption. Like, but and again, I don't view this as a debate. To me, this is a conversation. So
of course,
I don't have all the answers. I'm philosophically clumsy by far compared to you.
Yeah,
so
it's not even like, this isn't just like a philosophy position. Like, this is a position of like, how do you work at your job? How do you function in your personal life with your relationships? How do you function in political institutions? Like, there's a question of, there's a very naive engagement with the statement, do the ends justify the means, right? And the naive engagement is you look at any particular end and you look at some insidious set of means that you can use to effect that end. And as long as you get a good end, it's okay to do it. But the more spiritual engagement with that statement is when the ends are justifying the means, you are losing a piece of yourself every time you're making that journey. And those pieces that you've lost at some point, you're going to reach a position to where you're making these decisions in other areas of life where you don't need to. And now you're lost because you've lost too much of yourself to get to where you need to go. There's a strange there's a strange, every time I read a book, it starts to show in like all of my thinking. So I just read a book by C.S. Lewis called Mere Christianity. And one of the things that he talks about when it comes to virtues is that when you act in a certain way that is virtuous or unvirtuous, it's not so much the action that you're doing, it's that every single time you act in a certain way, you are fundamentally chiseling at a piece of your soul. When you act virtuous, you're creating something beautiful, something good. And when you act unvirtuous, you're destroying parts of it and it's being lost. And through many virtuous acts or many unvirtuous acts, after years and years and years, these will compound to create something fundamentally different at the end. So bringing all the way back to the beginning, sorry, because I'm getting a little bit off. If you engage in a lot of these unvirtuous acts, so that might be misinformation, lies, playing dirty, even if you effect the end that you want, you're going to be a fundamentally changed thing by the time you get to that end. You're probably not going to be happy with it anymore. You're going to want to push a little bit further. You're going to want to do something different because you're not the same person that started out on that journey when you had noble intentions. You just wanted to like change one or two things in order to effect like a good end that's justified by some ungood means. Does that make sense?
It does make sense.
Okay,
But
sorry.
see,
Yeah, go ahead.
no, and again, I mean, I appreciate that you kind of elucidating on that. It's interesting to me, and again, just kind of sussing this out in the conversation. This seems to be you're I feel like that somebody like C.S. Lewis would be fundamentally opposed to a lot of the principles that you either currently ascribe to or ascribed to in the past, like harm reduction, right? The idea of just picking the lesser of two evils. I feel like somebody like C.S. Lewis would never get on board with that, right? So it seems like this like current ethical question that you're really pondering right now based on where you are in your life and things you're reading is also diametrically opposed to broader things that you've ascribed in the past. Because what I would argue is, at the end of the day, in the secular world, in the political world, you do have to make every day constant conscious choices between either lesser of two evils or the less perfect
Yeah,
good.
I agree. So there's a different level of context here, right? Negotiating with other people to reach agreements is different than negotiating with your own principles, right? Making a compromise in a business deal is different than compromising yourself, right? When we do political actions, we are necessarily working in a system where we have to make compromises on almost every level because we have fundamentally different actors engaging with that system. A group of conservatives and a group of liberals, in order to effectively govern together, have to compromise in order to reach agreements for society to function. But compromising on your broad meta level agreements for society to run is different than compromising on your personal principles you use to effect those changes, I think.
Okay.
So like I might have like a personal principle against like I'm trying to think of where these would be incongruent with each other, or where it seems like it's the same thing, but it's actually like fundamentally different. Maybe I have a personal principle that says that like we should help people as much as we can through things like welfare reform and stuff. That's like I feel really strongly about that. But in order to pass some piece of legislation that like helps the homeless or bans guns or something, we have to cut that out of a bill. So if that is the case, then I don't feel like I'm personally I'm not personally compromising myself. That's just part of the political process. But if it was the case that like I'm walking outside and I see a homeless guy who like is begging for $10 for food, and I really want to spend like $10 on a Starbucks coffee, and I have that personal principle, I'm like, you know what, fuck it. This time I'm just gonna get a coffee, right? I think that that's a personal compromise that's different than the meta level compromise as part of your engagement with politics. Does that make sense?
Well,
yeah.
It does, but see, to me, but could be because I just don't have the background in this, but to me, it does sound like isn't it possible to have these like meta level, these like meta ethics or whatever, but not, you don't necessarily live them every minute of every day. So like,
yeah, of course. I'm not trying to say you give all your money to every homeless person. You're saying I'm just trying to point out the difference. That there's a difference between compromising in a system that necessitates compromise versus compromising with yourself and your own personal values. Yeah.
Well, so but then using that kind of paradigm, can't we say that in many cases that the elements of the left, either the fringe elements of the Democratic Party, or the more progressive elements of the Democratic Party, or people online or whatever, when they're advocating for things like abolishing the Electoral College, either abolishing outright or selectively carving out exceptions for the filibuster, people like me who've advocated for, to you and online and in private and with friends and whatnot, advocating for Democrats to fight more aggressively. Like, for example, beautiful example, and again, you've read the headlines, but this potential deal that's on the table between this reconciliation bill between Manchin and Schumer. And what started this was Republicans and Democrats were working on this bipartisan bill that would increase semiconductor chips, like domestic semiconductor chip production here in the U.S., and it was bipartisan, and it was going back and forth between the Senate and the House for like months because they were each adding things, changing the amount of funding involved, blah, 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 but it had broad bipartisan support. At the same time, Manchin and Schumer have secretly been working on this reconciliation bill that would, close tax loopholes, make, Medicare solvent past a certain point, all these things. And Mitch McConnell comes out about a month ago and says, if Democrats do a reconciliation bill about a completely separate issue using a process that they are entitled to use, if they do that, there will be no bipartisan chips bill. So McConnell was playing brinksmanship. Hey, we've been working on issue A, which I voted for, which I believe in, which I've whipped votes for. But if you try to get Biden a separate political win on a separate issue using reconciliation, I'm going to scuttle the first thing, just brinksmanship. So it looked like Manchin cowed. That was when we found out inflation was like at 9% or whatnot. Manchin backs out. So Democrats whip the votes, Republican whips the votes for the CHIPS bill. It passes. And then it turns out that McConnell and Schumer were still working behind the scenes on this reconciliation bill. And the same day that the vote passed for the CHIPS bill, Manchin and Schumer come out and say, yeah, we're still working on reconciliation and we've reached a deal. And Republicans went apeshit. Oh my God, you double-crossed us. Manchin double-crossed us. We told him not to do it or we wouldn't pass CHIPS. He waited till we passed CHIPS. And now he's doing I love that. I think that's great.
I mean, the scary thing is that if you
do it to us.
True, but the scary thing is, what if we're one vote off or something in the future where we need to negotiate another bill and Manchin legitimately would do it, but now they don't want to negotiate with him? I'm not saying that it's bad in every circumstance, but like, could you see that potentially happening? That now 100%. Manchin has lost some of his ability. Maybe we can argue that for a one-time thing, maybe it's worth it or something, but but also these are a little bit different too, because I would argue that, because I could say these are kind of like norms rather than like hard rules. Although you could argue that the Supreme Court Merrick Garland was a norm being broken instead of a hard rule, but I think that's kind of a big stretch compared to like promising votes and whatnot, of course. But yeah, I guess go ahead.
Well, no, I was just going to say, I mean, but I think that you could make the case, I think, for any sort of political transaction or exchange that it will have unintended consequences, negative unintended consequences in the future. I just don't think that Manchin is bad or did a bad thing. Now, he may have done a thing that will have negative political consequences in the future that he didn't intend, but I don't think like he's a bad person or did a bad. To me, it's like, no, fuck you, Republicans. You would absolutely do the same thing. You've done worse, and I don't think Democrats should be held to higher parliamentarian or procedural ethical standards than you.
Sure, so, maybe, yeah.
Well, but see, like, other than if it doesn't, in a hypothetical world where it would not have a negative consequence, would you look down on somebody like Manchin for kind of behaving, I don't want to say dishonestly, but, shrewdly and politically and perhaps not above board in a situation like this? It's like, do you take issue with something like that where Democrats...
It's hard because we're talking about norms that aren't like necessarily like hard rules, right? But like arguably the Senate is as dysfunctional as it is now. I guess I'm sure there's some good history book you could read, but like arguably the Senate is where it is now is because people have been juggling norms back and forth so much and have been willing to break them so much that's how like everything has gotten fucked to where it is,
Sure, I'll give you an example that I disagree with Democrats on, the filibuster. Somebody would have to make a really persuasive case to me to get rid of the filibuster just completely outright, because Democrats have used the filibuster for good reason and with good outcomes to prevent bad Republican legislation in the past. So the idea that anytime you use it, you're availing yourself of a racist tool and there's like inherent moral wickedness to using the filibuster. I don't buy that. And that's why I've always advocated for Democrats, be careful. I'm cool with you carving exceptions to the filibuster, because certainly Republicans abuse it all the time. But I do not want to just cough it up. Like, political scientists would have to make a really compelling exception that would not backfire spectacularly.
Maybe, yeah. I think that like... Just like in summary, to talk about what I was saying before, is that like when we're talking about changing an institution, if you're changing it to make it more democratic or more democratically representative, I think that's good. But if you're changing it just to effect a certain political outcome, I think that's bad. And it feels like people lean more towards the latter than the former when they're talking about changing institutions.
What if it affects a particular outcome, but also has the bigger effect of making, like, what if Democrats want to change, abolish the Electoral College? What if some Democrats want to abolish the Electoral College, not because of the higher virtue just for the sake of argument, that it makes society more democratic, though I think most of them would say it would. But because deep down they just want to stick it to Republicans, is it still not a good thing to do if it has the broader consequence of making things like?
No, I think because then the
relevant?
thing is that the personal motivation is going to be the guidance for your future actions, right? Like
Gotcha.
It might be the case that maybe it is the case that it's like raining outside, and ordinarily I'm a really bad driver in the rain. But if I go out with some friends and I drink a bit first and I drive home, it's actually safer because when I drunk drive, I only go like 30 miles an hour because I'm petrified I'm going to get into a car accident, right? So
Right.
Is it good in that case to drive drunk because it's going to make you safer? Or is the prevailing guiding virtue or thought there going to get you in way more trouble in the future, right?
True, and I would say it's also just kind of setting the standard. Like I imagine in most situations, again, like 99.
Yeah, that's what I mean. When you just said there, that phrase "setting the standard," that's kind of like the non-spiritual way, I guess, to refer to what I was saying, where you're fundamentally changing your character every time you make these compromises.
Yeah.
That's you're setting different standards, right? So like if in a hypothetical world where we found a way to get rid of what we perceive to be as unfair Republican rule, but we've done it by eliminating institutions, expanding the Supreme Court, silencing their version of the media, banning them off of all social networks. Like we do that, by the time we've reached the end there, those actors are so changed that they're liable to start to do other things that they're going to be unstoppable doing, right? Like theoretically, it could be I'm on a platform and I express, discomfort with trans women and cis women competing together, and now those institutions that have built themselves in a certain way, like, oh well, you're permabanned, and it's like, okay, holy shit, how the fuck did we get here? Because you've made these little changes over time, some of which I even advocated for, like, well, maybe there should be some social virtue in how we moderate platforms, or well, maybe we should be banning people based on political opinions or social opinions. Well, maybe, and those things are fine and dandy when you think about them in kind of a vacuum, but the mutated monster that inevitably emerges at the end of that evolutionary process is going to be a monster capable of doing so much more than what you envisioned in the beginning. And that's always the worry, I think.
I think that's certainly possible, but not to be too reductionist, would it be too reductionist to say that you fear the slippery slope?
So to be clear, slippery slopes aren't necessarily fallacious. It's only fallacious if you can't go from point A to
No,
point B,
that's what I mean, like reductionist. Like, is it too reductionist? I don't like to view it.
Yeah, so I would have said this a few months ago. I'm worried about the slippery slope, but it's not the slippery slope I'm worried about. I really am pointing at like character with a capital C here. That when you're equivocating and when you're betraying like these fundamental institutional principles or principles of democracy in order to effect certain outcomes, the more you run down that path, the more you're chiseling away the very character that you initially wanted to protect, and that at the end of that path, you're going to be a fundamentally different thing that's going to be capable of doing evil that you couldn't have done at the beginning, that maybe you would have been worried about the other side doing.
Yeah. So again, I don't know anime, but I'll throw one at you, which I'm sure you're familiar with. Surely you've seen Star Wars, right?
Yeah. It's not an anime, but yeah.
What you're talking about the dilemma at the end of, it's pretty much everywhere in Star Wars, but I think most particularly embodied at the end of Return of the Jedi, when Luke is standing before the Emperor and he's got Vader on his back and he's like, okay, strike him down, blah blah, and he chooses the last second to disarm himself, and because the idea is, if he takes this action, this relatively justifiable action of killing Vader, who's a mass murderer and monster and all these things, he is at risk of like compromising his own integrity. Now, obviously, with Star Wars, you've got space magic involved and such.
But no. It's a very salient point because Anakin had this same moment and he failed it when he killed, arguably, you could say maybe Count Dooku. Was that the first one where he where he just executed a dude?
Well, he killed that Tusken camp in episode 2, but when in episode 3 afterwards, when he's got Dooku disarmed.
Yeah, because I was literally disarmed or dishanded. But yeah, because he's like, I think he even says, he's like, no, it's not right. And then he does it, right? He is heading down a path where he at some point will be irredeemable. Maybe that was the first step towards the irredeemability, right? And then Luke has that same dilemma twice, right? Once where he ponders killing Darth Vader and he chooses not to. Another time where he ponders killing Adam
Driver.
Adam Driver, whatever the fuck,
Kylo.
Kylo Ren, and he decides not to. So he theoretically has this thing and he passes it, but like he has the same dilemma there where it's like there is there's this inner virtue of not murdering somebody, of not killing somebody who might be redeemable,
Right.
can't defend themselves. There's an inner virtue there. And by choosing to walk that virtuous path, even though he puts himself at a disadvantage, arguably both times, hopefully
Sure.
it plays out for the best, because exhibiting those virtues and projecting those virtues onto the world and having other people see those and engage with those will ultimately, hopefully, in a good and just world, whatever that means, hopefully leads to better outcomes, right? So even though the Emperor could have killed Luke afterwards, because Darth
Sure.
Vader saw the virtues that he was exhibiting, he changed his mind and he saved his son and he killed the Emperor. I would
But
have
you
to
know what's
rewatch the
interesting
three
about
sequels.
that?
Yeah, but
No,
go
no,
ahead.
no. And I mean, so what's interesting there, and that's actually what I was going to get to. Somebody still has to kill the Emperor. Like you can't like that. So I think that the like Star Wars is just a beautiful. It's a great story. It's deeply flawed or whatnot, but especially those moments in Return of the Jedi. But a couple of things, I guess, in this analogy, I would point out two things. Number one, the rebels are still trying to blow up the Death Star. Like they're not coming to the table to negotiate with the Emperor.
Sure.
They recognize he can't be negotiated with. He is a malignant presence that has to be stopped. Vader's different. Vader, there's a redemption angle in Vader, but they're still going to take the Death Star from the Emperor or die trying.
Sure.
And somebody still has to stop the Emperor in both situations, because Palpatine didn't go, oh, okay, Luke. Well, fair enough, man. I give up. And that to me is where everything you described, I completely understand. I told you from the beginning. I think that I recognize the utility you have as a brake check, but I don't see that limiting principle in the Republican Party. Trump's still, like, I just looked at a poll today, 53% of Republican voters will vote for Trump in 2024 over Biden,
True.
even though they'd prefer Trump not to run now. You see what I'm saying? Like,
Yeah, I understand. It's like, and again, I might like my political stuff has shifted a lot over the past few months. But I see myself, really the only reason I'm still here is I see myself as being a unique person that is capable of like grabbing the ears of people on the right, because when I speak, even if you disagree with me, at the very least it sounds like I have a level of honesty and integrity that makes me worthwhile to engage with, right?
Yeah.
I might be a cuck, I might be a fag, whatever you want to call me, but at the very least, when you listen to me, you know that I believe what I'm saying, and I'm doing my best to engage with all of the material in the most honest manner possible. I'm not just here to scream at you like a demagogue, call you racist or fascist,
Right.
call you a white, like I'm here engaging in the best way that I can. And I feel like if there were more, I feel like there's nobody like that. I don't see it anywhere in the political landscape. Maybe I'm not looking hard enough for it, or maybe I don't give people some credit that they deserve, but it seems to be demagoguery in all corners. And I feel like if there were more people like me, or more people trying to do that, I feel like we're not beyond the pale in terms of repairing like the divides between people in this country. But if we continue down the path that we're on, where we've shifted from changing hearts and minds to weaponizing our institutions and further polarizing ourselves and becoming more homogenous as a society, and that same people are staying together just in different ends, then that's like a path to the end of the empire. Like that's a surefire path to
Right.
destruction.
Well, I respect, again, the place that the Occupy. I mean, as far as my understanding is, there is nobody quite like you, because I don't think Vosh really engages with right wingers anymore.
Yeah.
He certainly has a lot to say about them, but he doesn't really engage with them.
To your real quick, to your point about the Death Star, that is
Yeah.
interesting. And thematically, I wonder if it's appropriate to destroy it. I'll say that for the sake of art, sometimes there are messages that are important thematically that you only see played out in main characters, and you don't see them played out in like side characters.
Sure.
So like some really good examples of this are, have you heard of The Last of Us 2?
I have, yeah.
Did you play it, or?
No, I watched some Let's Play, because it generated like a bunch of like pushback.
So like it might be the case that like I think, and I've only watched a lot and read a lot about it, I haven't played it, but it might be the case that ultimately The Last of Us 2 is a story about maybe not forgiveness, but at the very least the futility of endlessly pursuing revenge, right?
Sure.
But that message is displayed through the main characters, I think Ellie and Abby, right?
Yeah.
But that message is a little bit undermined by the fact that you kill like hundreds of people to get to Abby at the end for Ellie to walk away, right? So like it's kind of like that. But then I guess maybe another type of example would be in Batman. There is this is let me actually more specifically, The Dark Knight, right? You're
Right.
in an interesting paradox to where Batman believes in the virtue of the average person. Like, he believes that people are good, the people of Gotham are good, and the Joker doesn't. He thinks that people are inherently bad. And I think in a way you can argue that this is how our political spectrum works. You know, Joker resembles like are the biggest ideologues on the left and the right. He thinks people are inherently bad, they'll do what they'll do. Batman doesn't. He resembles some, I guess, arbiter of democracy or inherent virtue in people. And you have a weird predicament where there are people on a boat that have a bomb to people on another boat who also have a bomb to them, right? You remember the detonator
Right.
scene? Yeah.
I do.
And they go down this argument. And it's kind of unfair for me to use media because it could have gone either way, I guess, right? Depending how they write the show, right? So
Right.
they
So
take
that one guy could have grabbed the detonator and said, "To hell with this," and
sure, yeah, and then maybe we'd be
yeah.
having a different argument, be like, oh, well, should he? Yeah, but I guess like the point that the artist makes in that, Nolan is making in that film, is that like they took a vote and they wanted to do, and I think they even voted in favor of it, for the civilian boat to blow up the prisoner boat, but ultimately at the end of the day, like blowing up a boat full of people that don't deserve it is not a virtuous action, and they decided not to do it. But the people on the other boat recognized like the same type of virtue, and they didn't do it as well, right? And then through that kind of like negotiated virtue, where they both have these principles, you know, everybody ends up basically surviving. Whereas on the flip side, you know, somebody could have been blown up. Now, obviously, you've got Batman stopping the Joker and all of that on the side thing, but it's kind of like a similar train of thought. That this is like a very amorphous, nebulous, esoteric idea that I'm talking about. And like I said, maybe in a few months, I think it's all bullshit again. But like
Well, no, what I find interesting about this is, and this is why I try and it goes back to my conversation with Rob Noor, which I was hoping was going to be like just like an organic conversation with the right wingers that I had with Taftaj a couple of months ago, and I loved it. And the problem is, to me, these are things that you don't have, that nobody can have definitive answers for, right? Because I mean, all the questions and the ambiguities that you're raising are perfectly valid and have to be considered. And I am certainly not meaning to suggest that, you know, if we stick it to the Republicans as aggressively as possible, that it couldn't potentially be. I mean, because you could walk down like the dialogue tree and go down a zillion different permutations where it backfires one way or another.
Yeah.
But to me, it's like, I guess I just go back to the questions you raise are worth pondering, but I think so too is the opposite, which is, you know, right now, where you are right now in your headspace or in these ethical dilemmas, it seems like you're putting quite a bit of faith in either Republican voters or conservatives or right-wingers to de-radicalize. And I do think there's utility in that, but I just don't see on a broader, I know you've had personal success with it. But I don't think you can, you know,
change the whole
country. I think
country.
You put 100 destinies out there. There's no way in hell to de-radicalize
I guess,
the Republican Party.
In a broader way.
Do you not see, I guess, a two-pronged?
Two-pronged approach. The thing is that like, it feels like it has to be uncompromising, which I hate, and it's a hard answer, but it feels like there can't be like two prongs to this, because one prong will necessarily undermine the other one, right? There's a... I'm sorry, I don't know why I'm borrowing so much from this author, because I just read the book. There's this idea that C.S. Lewis talks about where evil people can only understand evil, but good people can understand evil and good, because through the pursuit of goodness, they see the potential pitfalls of evil. But for evil people, they can't even see the upside of goodness because they've never even tried, right? So like on your journey to become like a more spiritual or virtuous like Christian, in your journey to that road or your journey along that road, you can see the evil pitfalls and you can see the good at the end. So you've seen the ups and downs, but people that are, I'm circling, people that are evil, they can't even see the other end, right? They only see the evil. So if you're in league with people that are taking that second pronged approach, they're necessarily going to be counterintuitive to whatever you're trying to do at the end of the day. Like, you're going to hit a point to where they're not going to change. They're you don't want that company at the end of your journey building, you know, whatever movement you're building. I think in some ways, Biden is kind of trying this experiment. Like, you've noticed this, right? That that Biden's goal coming into this administration was, hey, I'm going to try really, really, really hard to be bipartisan. And arguably, Biden maybe maybe is the last most important president in the United States, because he's showing if that can work. Because there's a lot of people that want him to go way harder on everybody, but he's trying his damnedest to negotiate down the middle. He's gotten some big legislation passed, which seems good. He's gotten nice statements out of Republican senators and people in Congress, which seems good. Maybe this other bill passes, it's good. But like, if that experiment ultimately failed, say he didn't get the infrastructure bill, say like everything in the coronavirus package, everything got stalled, and say everything just got fucked, then maybe it's like too late. Maybe the battle's over. But if he does succeed here, like, I wish that more people would pay attention, and I wish more pundits would talk about the successes of Biden's bipartisanship, because I think it is the most important thing in the nation. This idea that we can come back together and have agreements with each other. Like, even on something like Roe v. Wade, it doesn't have to be no abortion or abortion up till like 2 years of age, right? Maybe there is a middle ground where we can all agree on like abortion in the first trimester is probably okay. Everybody in the country should be able to at least afford other people that ethical decision, right? And we all can probably agree that like 3 trimesters in is probably a bit much. At that point, you're killing something that you could literally accidentally deliver and it would pop out of your womb and crawl around and survive, right? So yeah, I don't know. I just, that desire to work through institutions and to work together without compromising your values too much is something that I wish I could, I want to see more people push towards, but...
I'll be interested to track this, you know, kind of this particular, I don't know what you're going to call this particular arc, the Mere Christianity arc or the C.S. Lewis arc or whatever, but I'll be interested to see, you know, kind of how you suss it out, because I guess the final thing I would say in summation is I think what you're describing is like a really beautiful worldview that, again, you'd see in an Aaron Sorkin drama. If you've not watched this show, you should. The West Wing, it's a classic. But that's not the world we live in. And I will acknowledge that President Biden has made, I mean, when people ask me, because Biden wasn't my first choice for a zillion different reasons, and I don't think he's dementia riddled, but he is certainly not the man he was in 2012 cognitively or rhetorically when he was going up against, you know, Paul Ryan, and he was like 95 then. So he was not and he is not my ideal choice. And the only way I would want him to run in 2024 is if he stands the best chance of keeping the White House out of Republican hands. So that's my ethic at this point. Run or don't run, whatever is the smartest move for Democrats at this point to maximize their chance of
Probably
winning.
run. You don't want to lose the incumbent advantage, right? That's like one of the only bearable things for Trump winning the election, is that if Trump runs and wins, at the very least, we don't have the incumbent advantage because it'll be a second term.
Right. So, I mean, and that's currently being debated because he is right now, Biden is experiencing, like, you know, historic disapproval ratings, I think rivaled only by Trump at the height of coronavirus. So we'll see how it turns out. But yeah, I agree with you. On paper, the incumbent generally has a colossal advantage.
Yeah.
But I will acknowledge that President Biden's made I shouldn't say gazillion, he's made considerably more bipartisan successes than I expected he would have.
Absolutely. He did way
bipartisan
better.
Infrastructure bill, that gun law that passed earlier this year.
Yeah.
The CHIPS bill.
The most gun legislation since Trump, because Obama didn't pass any, actually, funnily enough, but Trump banned bump stocks. But yeah, true, yeah.
Yeah. I think actually it might have been the biggest since Clinton even. I think like it might even go beyond what Trump did. But yeah, I mean, he's clearly had a lot of success. I'll just say that while I will totally own that he has been more successful than I expected him to be, which is, if you ever looked at my TikTok, you'll see me constantly praising Biden for a couple of reasons. Number one, I think it's a good way to hype up. You need to hype up Democrats. You can't just... Democrats suck at bragging about the shit that we've accomplished. It's infuriating.
Yeah, I've heard either you said this or I've heard other people say that Democrats suck at... Maybe we read the same article. Democrats seem to be really bad at taking... what am I trying to say? Taking... blank of their achievement. Yeah, taking credit for their achievements. They seem to be really bad.
They're awful. Yeah. So there's this analyst you should look up. He's written a gazillion articles. He's active on Twitter. His name is Simon Rosenberg, and I'll send you the link. He's a good guy to follow because all he does is basically with charts and graphs and links. I mean, he worked for Clinton. He worked for Obama. He's been like you see him on CNN and whatnot. The guys at Pod Save America have worked with him. He is he's a really big champion of Democratic accomplishments. He was the guy I learned the fact that in the past 30 years, there have been 44 million jobs created in the past 30 years. 42 million, 42 were created under Democratic presidents. That's insane.
Yeah.
But you don't hear that. I don't hear that. I don't hear that from people on Twitter or from like Democratic operatives. We just don't do it. So I mean, I want to do that to hype Biden up when I talk about him on TikTok, and also to piss off Republicans, to troll Republicans. But
Sure.
his bipartisan accomplishments, though, I mean, like, it's been like pulling teeth. You know, like the bipartisan infrastructure bill is a great example. So he finally got support from it when it was overwhelmingly popular with the majority of Americans, including independent and Republican voters. But the Republican establishment in Congress was reluctant to give him the votes necessary because they didn't want him to have a political victory.
Sure.
And you contrast that with how Democrats behave under Trump even. You look at the last year of Trump's administration during the height of COVID.
Yeah.
Democrats
I think McConnell, I think he explicitly said that his goal under Obama was to not let a single thing pass. Like, I think that was explicitly
to make him a
stated.
one-term president.
Yeah.
A one-term.
Which
and
is
he
not
similar.
Yeah.
He said similar things for Biden, just not quite. Like, he said that his goal right after Biden was inaugurated was to stop the socialist Biden administration. That was his goal. Now, he's worked with Biden a bit more than Obama. There's no doubt about that. But
but remember, and I think this is so important, and I think people don't realize this. Like, I do believe that these people in Congress, they are conduits for genuine American opinion. I don't think that it is just them, right? Like, if McConnell was truly saying these things and most Americans thought they were horrible, he would either lose the support of Republican leadership or he would lose his election. That's a harder sell. But like, this type of obstructionism is something that Republicans, I think, enjoy. And that's what has to be spoken to. Again, not focusing on the politicians or the process, but the actual underlying thought that's backing those people up.
Well, there's no doubt that Republican voters, I mean, clearly they reward Republican obstructionism. But
Yeah.
I guess when you say, like, okay, so because I think I've heard you say this before in different conversations, you know, how the country is so divided, so divided, and you know, Republicans are playing to their base. That's true, but I also think it's kind of like a feedback loop, isn't
Absolutely.
it? Like,
feedback between politics, media, and people, for sure. Yeah.
Right, that politicians and the media also move the public in a direction. It's not just the public moving them. It's constant.
A little bit, yeah, but I think
the
the public ultimately is what's dictating a lot. Now, what they end up creating can influence them to some extent, but people don't realize, I think, how much work politicians and media do to try to figure out where the public is at. A lot of people think that like the media and the politicians are telling the public what to think. Common conspiracy theory given, like you know, the media is saying this and that's what the media, blah, 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 blah. But I think that Trump revealed something truly surprising, in that the Overton window exists, and it's something that politicians are constantly trying to discover, not invent. Because if the Overton window could be invented, like, politicians could much more reliably win through financial means. People could much more reliably control messaging and control their popularity rates and their constituent voting rates and everything. Like, it would be so much easier, but it's not. Like, politicians are constantly searching for what people believe in. They're not creating it. And that was one of the big explanations why Trump was so successful. He discovered a whole range of the Overton window that everybody else didn't think was real, and they didn't speak to it. Even, I could be wrong, but before Trump, I don't know if there's any Republican in a moderate state that would have been brave enough to say that women should be prosecuted for having an abortion, right? That sounds like an unbelievable statement, but Trump said it on national news, and nobody knew that. None of the politicians knew that. Nobody in the media knew that. No, he's made other statements like, "Can you make fun of a prisoner of war as a Republican?" Absolutely not. That's against the rules. But they weren't against the rules, and Trump figured that out. Now, I don't think he did it intentionally. He's just a dumbass and got lucky. But he discovered parts of the Overton window that other people didn't know existed. So yeah, I understand there's a feedback loop that is created, but I think that culture is very complicated and very hard, and I think people underestimate how complicated and hard it is when they pretend, or when they assume, that politicians or media can create the culture, can lay the track in front of the train as it's going down, you know, its course. I don't think that's possible. Yeah.
So, well, then how would you square, I mean, I've got my theories, but how would you square, like, you take Biden's Build Back Better agenda. I understand that, you know, national polling is not necessarily reflective of, like, individual red states, but let's use an easy example, West Virginia. Sure. What I remember, West Virginia, which is the reddest state, I'm pretty sure, in the country, Build Back Better, at least the policy prescriptions, the individual, increasing taxes on the rich, closing loopholes, addressing climate change, all the way down, polled pretty well in West Virginia. But obviously, they hate Biden with a passion. They hate Democrats, and that's part of the reason why Manchin's popularity has only ever increased the more he is perceived by West Virginia voters to be sticking it to the president, right?
Sure.
So let's say, because what I understood your argument to be, or your position to be on this, is basically that, you know, Republicans are being obstructionists because Republican voters want obstruction. They want Democrats to be obstructed. Probably right. I mean, I think there's polling to indicate that they don't want Republicans to really work with Democrats and whatnot. But how do you like juggle these two things? How can West Virginia voters simultaneously love, you know, Biden's Build Back Better agenda, but want Manchin to not work with Biden on it?
Yeah, because I think there are a lot of other things at play that need to be considered. Like, the interaction isn't going to be as simple as, you know, like, this is just people's natural policy positions stemming from their moral or ethics or whatever. Like, it's going to be like, what do they talk to their communities about? What are the things that pundits are talking about? What are the things that politicians are talking about? How are they reacting to the current Democratic establishment? Like you said before, I'm not saying these things are entirely disconnected. Like, there is going to be some feedback loop that exists there, but it is possible that even Biden will be able to break through and get some legislation passed, like the infrastructure bill or whatever, even if West Virginians are against it, if it is something that's like so massively popular that most people support it, you know?
Do you think it's possible that voters, because I don't think, I'm sure you would agree, most voters, most Americans, period, are not very well politically educated.
Yeah, or educated on anything related to the economy or inflation or anything, yeah.
So with that, okay, the economy is a great example, and I've heard you talk about this, and I completely agree. The economy is actually, I'm not going to sit here and simp for inflation, and I'm not going to sit here and say that Biden's agenda has not, you know, contributed somewhat to it. I think most economists agree that the American Rescue Plan that Biden passed right when he got inaugurated has contributed at least a couple of percentage points of inflation. But it is also true that the economy is not just inflation, right?
Yeah, it's really hard to tell right now if we have inflation. Or, I'm sorry, it's really hard to tell right now if the economy is in a recession. It's like, I've seen people argue back and forth on this. Some people want to just throw out the inflation number, but like, inflation is averaged across a lot of different metrics. It's not just a flat across the board. Wages might not have been completely keeping up, but across some sectors, it's been outpacing it. I don't have this number off the top of my head, but I think that the lowest earners in society have been making the biggest gains in wages. I hate to throw an anecdote out there, but I've done a lot of travel recently, and the amount of like fast food restaurants that I've seen that like are offering like $15 an hour wages for people, I'm like, holy shit. It's like unbelievable, like how much is like being offered for some of these lower jobs. And then like, I know that our labor force participation rate is falling, but maybe the boomers are finally leaving, like we've said they've been for 20 years. Our unemployment is unbelievably low, so wages across certain sectors are rising. I had a friend email me that works for a too big of a place he doesn't want me to say, but he says that, I don't know if this is true or not, I'm just literally echoing it. He said one of the biggest things that people look for in like funds and in big management firms to see if we're entering a recession is what is the default rate or the going out of business rate for small businesses. And I think he said that like when we start hitting bad recession points, it's like 3.6% or 3.5%, but he said it's like less than 2%. He said that it's about what you'd expect it to be. So he doesn't think there's going to be a big recession. I don't, it's like, it's really complicated to even figure out if we aren't. But if enough people think we are and they've told themselves that, then obviously they're going to treat
reality, right? And it's not only that they've told themselves that, it's also they've been told that by, I would argue, bad faith Republican operatives, right?
Yeah, pundits and politicians and people in their community, yeah.
Right, that focus exclusively on inflation, which again, I do not want to make it sound like I am glossing over, because inflation is ridiculous and people are feeling it, but that is not the only metric. It's the same thing we see when people talk about how great the economy is due to the stock market, even though I think most economists would agree that the stock market is not the most reliable metric by which you evaluate an economy, because a relatively small percentage, and you correct me if I'm wrong, because I know you're pretty up to date on that's one of the things that triggers you the most as leftists who commentate or offer opinions about like finance and the economy. Like, so if I get something completely wrong, go ahead and interrupt me. But the stock market's only one metric by which you evaluate an economy. You could look at GDP growth, jobs created. Yeah, you can look at the
CPI, PPP. Yeah. You can look at there's a ton of different metrics. You can look at like number of people buying houses and everything. Yeah, but like it's so funny because like even when you're trying to do things that are healthy, Like the way that the reporting and everything is very strange. So like people are talking about how like rising interest, like these stories are reported as negative. Rising interest rates are reducing interest in new homes by like 60%. And people are like, oh my God, like it's impossible to buy a home. Like, motherfucker, no, it was impossible to buy a home because they were getting so massively inflated. You want that number to decrease. That's the goal. One of the goals of raising interest rates is to reduce like the velocity of money, reduce like how much is being loaned, or reduce, you know, how many of these other bubbles are forming because there's so much easy money out there. Like that's a good thing. We're trying to cool down some of these markets. Of course, we expect to see prices or demand fall. That's the whole point, you know. But even those things are being reported as a negative thing, you know.
Well, and have been for some time. So even before the Fed, I can't even remember what the hell the inflation rate is now, or not the inflation rate, the interest rate is now, because then they raise it by like several percentage points even in the past few days. But like even before all that happened, before the Fed was starting to take aggressive action to raise interest rates to cool the economy off, or the inflation off. I mean, again, Democrats were not talking about these things. They were not talking. I mean, you would see like Jen Psaki and a couple of others say, well, you know, the biggest job growth since Clinton, or all these things under Biden. But the Republicans were unified that this is a shit economy. You need to look at inflation only. Biden's responsible for it.
Yeah, they want to look at their metric, yeah. And they were crazy about talking about unemployment under Trump, but they don't talk about unemployment now, even though unemployment is unbelievably low, right?
Very. It's like 3.1% or something, like 3.6, I think.
3.6 was my last time. It was 3.1, holy shit, but yeah.
No, but I mean, I don't even know how we got on the subject. But anyway, it was like, you know, Democrats need to message on this more, and so like I agree that like these are so many incredible things that were accomplished under Biden, but I just look at, you know, I look at the penalty. After the bipartisan infrastructure bill passed, the handful of senators who voted for it and the handful of members of the House of Representatives who voted for it, they were being excoriated on like Fox News, Newsmax, Ben Shapiro, I think, and a bunch of others for basically giving Biden a political victory.
Yeah.
And so it's like,
and that's not good, because we should be voting on the goodness or the badness of the legislation. It shouldn't be on the political victories.
100%.
Yeah.
I mean,
one of the
and I just look at, when you contrast that with how, I'm not saying that Democrats don't do it. I'm not saying that Democrats don't emphasize certain things. We have absolutely overemphasized particular economic metrics when they are not doing well under Republicans.
Yeah, of course. Like one of the biggest ones you ever heard was, I think, African American unemployment under Trump, because it was a particular metric he was proud of. I must have heard that a million times. Just that number.
Still hear about it.
Yeah.
You still do it.
Yeah.
But
there's. I don't know what to do when there's an incongruence between how the economy is doing versus like how people think it's doing. I don't remember if there was a study or if it was a survey, but I remember you could show that like you could ask people questions about how the economy is doing, and their perception, even for things that they personally engage financially with, is actually just totally wrong. Like they'll think something is really bad, or they'll think something's really fucked, but when you look at the numbers, it's just actually not true at all. And sometimes, their perception of things is just based on the type of media they listen to, or what their community or family or friends think, or it might be because of the other side is pushing a particular thing.
Well, I think there was like one recent poll, and again, I wish I had this link. I know I've got it somewhere in Google Docs, because I have a shit memory, so I try to like keep track of all this stuff if I need to like look back at it later. There was polling to indicate that most voters thought that job loss was higher under Biden than it was Trump, you know, in the past couple of months or whatnot. So I mean, you know, the voters are clearly, you know, not educated on the subject, and I think a lot of that has to do with, you know, Democratic failures of messaging as much as Republican over messaging on a particular issue. But it's like, going back to the broader subject, like what I hope, as you kind of litigate this arc with yourself, and kind of suss this out, is I know you're a lefty, I know you vote Democrat, no doubt about it, but one of the things I hope you're able to meaningfully emphasize without losing that connection to the right wing or the center right audience, that you like you said, you people in that space have an ear for what you have to say. What I hope they get from it is the fact that the Republic. Here's a case I don't think is made all that much, and maybe you've been making it and I just haven't heard it. I don't think that the Republican Party does well by their conservative constituents. And I guess what I mean is, you know, we were talking about how Republican politicians behave in a way that is reflective of their base, right? They're incentivized to do certain things because that's what their base wants. But it's like Republican policies hurt Republicans. you look at Trump's tax cut bill, that went to 80% of the benefits went to a multi-millionaires and billion. It didn't go to impoverished people in West Virginia or Kentucky or anything else, right? I mean, do you think that you have the opportunity, I guess, to make the case?
But before you get there, right? So this is the question: is it reasonable or rational to assume that people vote on politicians just for legislation that is beneficial to them?
No, clearly they don't.
Exactly,
right?
yeah.
I mean,
so it might be the case that that's actually secondary to maybe the moral imperative they feel they have to vote for Republicans, or maybe the groupthink or the tribalism they feel for supporting Republicans. That might actually be more important to them than the legislation itself, in which case the Republicans, through a democratic system, are engaging with the system the way that they probably should be. Like, that's, yeah.
Is it your assessment then? Because this is my belief. My belief is it's a combination of two things. Number one, I don't think Republican voters have been sufficiently educated, by Democrats or by Democrat advocates in how Republican policies hurt them. Like Bernie Sanders, I'll give him kudos for going on Fox News, Pete Buttigieg, people like that. And I think that this online is a space you do and can occupy, making the case to these audiences like, hey, look, you are basically slitting your own throats with these votes. But even if it's the case that that's a secondary concern, do you think the primary concern is that Republican voters are more anti-left than they are pro-right? Like, do you understand what I mean? Like,
I don't know. It's hard because, like,
well, in your interactions with these people in these audiences, what's your take? What's your gut check? Like, do you think Lauren Southern or Nick Fuentes are motivated by
those people are outliers? They're not like the norm.
Gotcha.
I'm trying to think what you're really asking me. The essence of what you're asking me, I think, kind of, is a moderate right person more likely to vote for a Democrat than a moderate left person is to vote for a Republican? Like, who's more likely to switch sides versus who's more likely to be kind of like ideologically pure or committed to their particular side? I don't know the answer to that question. I'm not sure.
I mean, I don't know if that. I mean, that is an interesting question. That may be like the baser question of what I was asking. It wasn't what I had in mind, because now I'm thinking about it. We know that in 2016 there were many districts that voted overwhelmingly for President Obama. They swung sail to Trump, I think, leaning into that outsider disruptor aesthetic. I don't know what the metric is for that in 2020. Now, he did get more votes in 2020 than he did in 2016, but those may have been additional centrists or right-wingers turning out, and not necessarily people who voted Democrat in the past. You've also commented in the past that, Republicans are, they've got an untapped voter base among, they're tapping it now, they're making more progress now, but like with Hispanics, for example, or other minority voters who might be more socially conservative for religious reasons, that they often ignore with their so I don't know the answer to that question. We may end up in a situation where, on the whole, Democrats are still less willing to vote for a Republican than vice versa. But I don't think Democrats vote for Democrats to own Republicans, if that makes any sense. Whereas
I think it probably happened with Biden and Trump because the hatred for Trump was so big, right?
But surely that was, but surely it was also because they thought Biden would be a better president, right? So I guess, and again, I have no data for this. It may exist or it may not, but my gut check is certainly people turned up to vote for Biden because they hate Trump. But I think their hatred was well-founded based on not just shit that Trump said, but how he legislated and how he governed. Whereas what you and I were just talking about suggests there could be a disconnect between right-wing voters, where it's like, hey, look, I understand what you're saying.
I don't even know how I would figure out the answer to that, because it would have to be done that would have to be explored in literally in case studies. Polling wouldn't be sufficient, because like if I were to ask my mom, why do you support Trump over Biden, she might say policies. Or like, here's a conversation that you could have with probably 90% of Republican voters. Do you support Trump or Biden more? They'll say Trump, obviously. Okay. Right. Do you support Trump just because you like Republicans, or do you support Trump because of his policies? They'll say, obviously, because he has better policies. Okay, name two. Like, you're already done. Give me one policy besides the tax cuts that Trump did to help the economy. you won't get a single answer. So even though people might say things like, well, I prefer the policy, like, do you? You don't even know what the policies are. Like, it seems like you might answer that in a poll, but you would have to explore this in like interviews and case studies to figure out like what's truly powering voters, to figure out what they're voting for, because it's so hard to tell just by looking at numbers at a glance, you know?
Well, now I'm sussing this out too, because okay, I've got so many red red voting Republican family members and friends. Like I grew up in a red state. The state I was born in was a northern state, but the area was also red. So it's like those are most of the people that I know. Like probably 60% are conservative. And so now, what if the question was this? What if it was like, okay, who'd you vote? Who do you prefer, Biden, Trump? They say Trump, and you know, for his policies or his attitude. Of course, they would say policies or both or whatever. But then instead of saying name two, do you think it might be like rhetorically efficacious to like go through like certain policies, like, hey, do you support legislation that, you know, raises taxes on the rich, that creates more jobs, that, you know, and then, hey, would it surprise you to know that it's that you just described Build Back Better, or you just described, you know, do you think that you could, that me or you or somebody could like do it that way?
Yeah, I think you could, but these would have to be personal conversations, or conversations that pundits have, that would have to happen in a very compassionate manner. Like, you're going to be practicing politics and a whole heap of social psychology while you're trying to make these types of conversations, because it's so easy to follow up any of these types of things with a big trigger that immediately shuts down the conversation. Like, do you support this, this, and this? Like, okay, here's like 5 different ways to go. Okay, do you support this, this, and this? Okay, well, you described like 3 major provisions of the Affordable Care Act, so like it seems like you maybe could support that. You're not even aware of it, right? That's one way you could say it. Another way you could say it is like, do you support this, this, and this? Okay, well, that's the Democratic plan. Republicans are trying to fucking destroy that, so you have no idea what you're voting for, right? Or you could say, do you support this, this, and this? Oh, you don't even know? Well, so you voted against Obamacare and you don't even know what the fuck it is. Like, why the fuck do you even have a strong, right? There are so many more ways that are more entertaining and aggressive, but they will trigger a mind and make it feel like people need. This is one of the reasons why I'm trying to be less aggressive when I talk to people. People need a space to explore things. Everybody does. People with mental illness, LGBT people, women, gamers, everybody. People need a place where they can explore an idea or thought without feeling like somebody's going to jump down their throat just for entertaining that idea. And when you listen to a lot of pundits talk, it feels like if you make a concession that they're right about something, that like, oof, they owned you on something. Like, it feels like you are like destroying.
Well, it's adversarial, right?
Yeah,
like
of course.
But that's why I don't pitch myself as a debater or whatnot. Like, I like having conversations like these. Like, it's just you and me on Discord. Your chat may be like going, holy shit, this is the most boring conversation ever. But like, this is how I learn, and this is where, you know, conversations that that David Pakman has and that you have, and I've heard Vosh have, and all these things. But it's meant to be non-adversarial. It's meant to be disarming. That's why, like, right out the gate, when this conversation started, I had a whole list of shit that I just wanted to say, like, dude, concessions right off the bat, just so you know.
Yeah, I understand that. With you and me, it's less important though, because we already have a good rapport, right? I think we do, unless we got in a screaming match and I missed it.
No, not yet.
It's harder, and this is why I get so mad, and why I do think I can legitimately say people like Vosh and Hassan are actually damaging to what I try to do, is because I would rather talk to somebody that's been inundated with Republican propaganda their entire life than somebody that's listened to the right and left. Because if I get somebody that has only heard Republican talking points, then I can have a conversation with you, and I can present you ideas in ways that you haven't gotten them before, and hopefully, assuming I do it in a polite enough manner, and I feel like I'm being reasonable and fair in the way that I present things, I can give you a different perspective to consider. My goal isn't, like, everybody in my server is always like, de-radicalize, blah, blah. It's not even my goal. My goal isn't to de-radicalize anybody. My goal is just to say, like, here's another perspective that you could consider. Maybe it would be better to do this than that. Maybe. Think about it. That's all I want, is for somebody to think about it. Even if they ultimately disagree with me, at the very least, that seed is planted, and they have like another way of viewing a problem, that maybe it doesn't have to be only the way I've heard. But the problem is that I would rather come to either fertile ground or completely unkept ground than ground where I'm going to have to uproot the weeds of whatever Vosh and Hassan and AOC and the more extreme people on the left have laid. Because if I come to somebody that's been exposed to their rhetoric, I can't just give them a new perspective to think about. I have to spend a lot of time alienating myself or differencing myself from the other people that claim to be on the same side. And that's a lot more work for me to do. And all of the negative psychosocial traits that those people have, I have to disarm one by one by one by one. Like, I have to tell you, like, listen, I'm not going to call you a fascist. I don't think you're racist. I don't think you're hateful. I've got to go through and I've got to make sure that they understand I'm nothing like this other person that seems to be advocating for something similar to me. And that conversation might already be doomed off the start. There's a lot of people I've talked to personally, that I talk to publicly here, but I talk to them personally, and they'll readily admit stuff like that. They're like, yeah, you know what? On stream, maybe you do actually make like decent arguments, but it's so hard to agree with anything because you know the second you do, there's going to be a million people that'll jump down your throat for it. Or the second you do, there's going to be people making videos about like, oh, this person, you know, they totally backtrack this and blah, blah, blah. And it's just, it feels like so inhuman to be able to undergo those types of changes publicly because you're not given a space to do it without massive judgment, you know?
No, I mean, I clearly see the utility there, and that's why my last conversation with Rob, I was not prepared for it because I was only familiar with him based on Hippy Dippy, and I think you guys had one conversation and you were able to match his energy. And so I was thinking, okay, I could just go into it kind of, hey man, because I'm one of those people, I have no problem making a concession. I really don't, publicly or privately. To me, it's like if you cut yourself down with the sword, or if you fall on the sword, you are less likely to be cut down with it by somebody else, which is less humiliating. Or more humiliating to be cut down by somebody else. But
Sure.
but yeah, you know, the thing is that when you have these conversations and you're able to make headway with people who you may very well literally be their first genuine impression of the quote unquote left.
Yeah.
It's with you. They don't have experience with Bosch, Hassan, or all the
Sure.
people that you think are, you know, less efficacious. What happens? Like, when you give them the space, kind of suss things out, and you're not dogging them, you're not saying, hey, do you agree with these policies? Oh yeah, I sure do, one by one by one. Well, that's the ACA, you stupid son of a bitch. But when you don't do that, and you're able to kind of coax them, what happens? Like, you clearly have no control over what happens when you're done with the conversation.
No.
So
It's going to depend on like my position in that person's life. If it's somebody that watches a lot of my content, then over time I can probably move them. If you put me in somebody's permanent life as a fixture, I think I'll move them over time because I'll give them other perspectives to consider. But I think that one of the huge failings of people, not even in political spaces, but in personal, relationship, social, work, like one of the biggest failings of people is understanding and considering other people's perspectives. And when you've lost the ability to consider another perspective, you've lost the ability to change a person's mind. Because when you can't conceive of minds that aren't like yours, you can't tell them the things that they need to hear to consider something different. It's like trying to plug an HDMI input into like or like an HDMI cord into like a DVI input. Like you fundamentally can't transmit the ideas or the data or the things, right? Like if somebody's going to be screaming at somebody like a Republican about like supporting homeless stuff, and they're going on and on about public responsibility and taxes should be higher, whatever. Like the Republican person is just thinking like, or the conservative, I should say, is just thinking like, well, what makes my community better? Like that's all they really care about generally, especially for smaller community. Like what makes my community better? They might live in an area where there are no homeless people, legitimately, because homelessness is that's a liberal problem. That's a big city problem. Right?
Yeah,
you're probably not going to
find,
and their way of approaching society is like so much fundamentally different depending on how rural you go, right? Like in certain rural societies, like the idea of having homeless people there doesn't even make as much sense because you have because your community should be taking care of them, or your churches should be taking care of them, or family members should be taking care of them, right? The idea that you would go across the city and ask another dude to chip in for family problems or things on your side, like that's an alien topic. And I think a liberal has the ability to understand that, but they're just not. They don't have that conservative perspective, so they're just totally disconnected.
There was this. I know you're familiar with this guy because I think I've seen you two like have exchanges, and my political, like I get my political commentary and my current events takes from a variety of people, because again I listen to you, but I do listen to Vosh's like specific content. I don't listen to his streams. Listen to some more news. Cody Johnston, I really like a lot of his videos, and I know you two have had a couple of back and forths. He had a tweet pinned on his profile a long time ago, and it was something to the effect of, the left got a little too PC, so I changed my mind on, economics, human rights, civil rights, all these things, which is, it does seem to be interesting to me. And I understand it's human. I get it. I understand how a person can be triggered, traumatized, or driven away based on presentation and not just substance. And not everybody is either secure enough or equipped enough or comfortable enough to overlook annoying presentation.
Yeah,
to
most
just deal
people
with
aren't.
substance. Right. Do you feel that, because this is one thing that I've wondered about you, because it seems like over time you've become more critical of the left for of many reasons that you've described. But I keep going back to a lot of the confrontations that you've had with Hassan and Keffels and Vosh and all these things. Do you ever do self-reflection? This isn't a rhetorical question, it's genuine. About
No, 100% I do. I think that I've had a moral failing with how I've dealt with some of these people. I don't know how. I'm sorry. Your question was going to be: do you think that because I'm speaking of a way to bridge a divide against people that fundamentally disagree with a lot of the things that I'm saying, but I don't extend that same compassion towards lefties, right, or trans people, right?
That was one part. Yes, that you did anticipate that part, but the other part is: do you think you've been moved further right on policy positions?
No, my policy positions will always be independent. I can be in a room full of 1 million people screaming at me that I'm a retard for something, and it's not going to change my policy positions, because my policy positions are influenced by studies, data, or good arguments that I hear. It's never going to be people that like me or dislike me. That's just how.
What
my
about your
brain's work.
advocacy thereof? Like, are you
My
more or less
advocacy
like-
might vary. It's just that's going to depend on a lot of things, right?
Okay.
But even for Chloe, when we were in the middle of that thing, she actually emailed me recently, and I sent her an email back. Even for that Bob person, Chloe person made rape jokes about my wife, had the whole pedo groomer shit that everybody texts me on. Like, at the height of that disagreement, there were people that were DMing me for like ways to take down her website, or for like how you could report her in different ways. And anytime I would get a DM like that, I would send them a message back, and I'd be like, hey, you know what? Like, this site is probably doing more good than harm. Like, it's not worth it to go this route. Like, this isn't a good thing, you know? But those people were probably only feeling like it because of the conflict that I was creating between me and her, right? So
Right.
and one of the stories that I'd gotten a lot from some of the trans people that were emailing me is that for a lot of these people online, it's hard because you have to figure these people are legitimately like 17, 18, 19, 20, right? And I'm coming in here swinging around like 7 years of like razor sharpened morality, philosophy, political positions, debate skills. And I'm taking somebody that might legitimately be like a 19 or 20-year-old trans person that's been shit on their whole life. They finally find a community that agrees with them, and they become kind of like militant online because like that's the buy-in to that community. And then they run into me, and it's like a fucking steamroller, and it seems like the worst thing in the world. Like, I can empathize with that position more now. That like a lot of the people in these communities are in these communities because these were the ones that they needed to find, because in life it was like so hard otherwise. So if I look at it from that perspective, and then I'm approached by one of these more like kind of radical trans advocates online, like my response to come swinging in with like the biggest bulldozer debate strategies I have is going to produce exactly the effect that I would assume would happen with Republicans if I would just call them all like fascist, racist, retarded dipshits. Do you know what I mean?
I do. And that's why I think it's important to separate, to me, the Republican Party and its like leadership, people like McConnell and McCarthy and Trump and DeSantis, from the Republican voters, because it would be profoundly hypocritical to hate the quote unquote right just wholesale, or think that the right is quote unquote fascist wholesale, when you have as many loved ones as I do, friends and family, who are on the right, and who, I mean, I've got 4 sisters, and I think all 4 of them voted for Trump in 2016 and in 2020 and whatnot, and it's certainly been a source of tension. I don't hate them. I love them. I love them just as much as I did before I found out how they voted. But I also think that they're victims of a lot of the, not only legislation, but ultimately how certain things are trending. Like, to me, it's a difficult line to straddle, and clearly the left doesn't always do it. Sometimes I don't think they go hard enough on the Republican Party leaders because they don't want to alienate the voters, and I think oftentimes certain policy advocates don't go too far you know, and do alienate the voters and whatnot. So I understand your gentle approach, and maybe ultimately at the end of the day we're just quibbling over certain things, but kind of like how I think you're a good brake check on certain excesses rhetorically of the left. Even though I'm, a fraction of, I mean, my God, I have like 100 people on YouTube. I've got more followers on TikTok than that. But I like people to continue to try to nudge you in certain directions.
Yeah, and nudging is
maybe
good.
you're receptive to it, maybe you're not.
Nudging is fine. Ideological nudging is good, but the psychosocial part is the most important part, I think. Conservatives have figured that out to some extent. Like you can see before Charlottesville and everything, before it kind of fell apart, like the online Nazi people were figuring that out. I mean, they understood it well. And that's why like all of them made fun of the Charlottesville people because it looked fucking horrible, and the alt-right basically died that day with Heather Heyer, I think, getting ran over, and just how atrocious all of that was. But yeah, it really feels like I am part of a Motte and Bailey when I'm trying to present, and I see this happen with personal friends to where I'm presenting a moderate view of it, like I'm giving a moderate presentation of my far left view of the world. And they'll get it from me, and I'll seem reasonable, and they'll agree that I'm reasonable. But when they venture out into the world, every other person that has my politics is just bashing them over the head with it. And it feels like I've set them up for like a Motte and Bailey, like a bait and switch, where I'm like, just because you don't want to date a trans person doesn't make you transphobic. Just because you believe this or that, it's not the worst thing. It's okay to explore and question these things. It's okay to like wonder, can you be trans at 4? Is HRT for minors a good thing? Is the study, or is the data high quality? Like these are all fine things to explore and answer. And somebody might hear me and they might even think like, okay, you know what? I used to be totally anti-trans, but Destiny's got me on that, like, maybe people should be allowed to make those decisions. And then as soon as you step out into the world, any other person that has my political positions is calling you transphobic, saying you're hateful, throwing the 41% number out, you're making kids kill themselves. And then when they look at me, I almost come across as a dishonest actor. It feels like I'm hiding something. Do you understand how that feels?
Sure, because people, I mean, some people at least have the instinct to see you as part of a broader movement.
Exactly.
Right?
And it's impossible to divorce myself from that when we inhabit so much similar political space. Like it reminds 100%. Me of the saddest thing that I saw during the BLM riots were the poor black kids on fucking stream, like begging white Antifa kids to fuck off when they started to like destroy shit. Because it was like the most horrible co-opting of, and I'm not trying to say no black people rioted, or I'm not making any statement that strong, but I'm just saying that there was video after video after video of like black dudes in hoodies on camera, like, please stop, like, go the fuck away. And these white kids just like throwing bottles at buildings, breaking shit with bats, who were like, no, like this is blah, 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 blah. There was one video where I think the girl was even saying things like, at the end of the day, like you're going back home to your suburbs and you're trashing the places that we live. And it's like, damn, like what an analogy for what it feels like so much of politics today is like, where I just want to be like the kid on the street protesting, but everybody around me wants to be a rioter.
Yeah, well, and I think you've been a pretty consistent, and I would say for the most part, there are a couple of exceptions. I think you might have gotten a bit too fiery, but I think you've been a consistent voice. I don't even want to say of dissent, because clearly you overall support the aims and whatnot of Black Lives Matter, and you do believe Black Lives Matter, and you do recognize that the vast and overwhelming majority of all these protests were incredibly, I mean, when you think about it, how disparate it wasn't being organized by a single central body. You're talking about coast to coast, millions of people for 16 months, the single biggest, most enduring mass protest in history. And not to gloss over the property damage, the lives lost and livelihood, but it's incredible that it was as peaceful as it was overall as a phenomenon, where you take
a little bit, yeah. Although because of the size and scope, 96% is not enough, right?
Well, no, I mean, I hear you. I mean, I'm not saying that that's just the cost of doing business, right?
That rhetorically, that we need more optically than that. Kind of like saying like Islam is a religion of peace. Like largely that's true, but there's a lot of Muslims, and even a small percentage of those causing problems. You're never going to win an argument by saying Islam is the religion of peace, when at parts of our recent history they've been involved in like the majority of like international terrorist attacks. You're always going to be a loser on that argument there.
Well, sure, but I guess there has to be some sort of middle ground, because the right will take it too far.
I agree.
Say,
But I think that I think
you can't give that, you can't breathe life into that, because that's not fair.
I agree.
Imagine if there was the January 6th equivalent on a scale of BLM. You know what I mean? Like,
it would be the right would be talking about
could,
literally like, progressive diversity, woke people trying to take over the country. It would be the end of the world, maybe. Yeah.
Right. Right. I don't think the right could have had an equivalent of BLM for whatever cause, and it conducted. I don't think we would see 96% peaceful or anything like that. I mean, Jesus. Again, look at January 6th. It's just a microcosm. If you were to scale it up and make it comparable, I personally don't think that the right wing would be able to pull it off, or the far right or whatnot. So, and I'm not saying that there are these perfectly drawn lines where you can simultaneously acknowledge the horror of that 4% of violent riots, without. I acknowledge that there's no good way to do it. I think that you can. I don't think you should give too much ground to that.
I think that the ground you have to give is like the honest ground. You have to be honest. Like, there was a lot of damage caused by the BLM riots. There was an unacceptable amount of damage caused by the BLM riots. And the level of tolerance for it in the loudest figures in the Democratic Party was unacceptably high. Biden did a good job generally in condemning the violence. He could have condemned it harder. But when we're looking at essentially, people want to push charges to Donald Trump for driving January 6th, even though he wasn't directly involved. Now, I think that spiritually, he definitely fomented the environment necessary for that to happen. 100%. Charges, I wouldn't go that far, right? But when it felt like so much of the Democratic establishment
I'm sorry to clarify, you're saying when you say charges, you mean he shouldn't be charged?
I don't think he should be charged, That could be a separate argument. You can write that down if you want. Sure. We can go through that quickly. But when people want to hold Trump responsible for kind of the spiritual leadership of January 6th, I mean, we have to look at how, and I've been super critical of this, how the left handles things like police shootings, and how the left handles things like videos being released that are driving people to do these insane riots. Like, there are so many BLM martyrs that when you go through and you read the facts of the matter, you're like, what the fuck? Like the Michael Brown story, right? Michael Brown? Is that name correct?
I know the last name was Brown. I don't know if it was Michael or not. I'm thinking of like Jacob Blake and George Floyd, obviously, Breonna Taylor.
Yeah. Was Michael Brown Ferguson? Yeah, maybe, yeah. Like when you read like the facts of the matter of like this story, it's like you come away thinking something that's like way, way, way different than how it was originally presented. And it happens like that with a lot of these types of stories. The Jacob Blake thing was another one where it's like, Jesus, what a horrible, horrible, horrible thing. Yeah, go ahead.
Well, the one I know you spent quite a bit of time on was Breonna Taylor, and that one's pretty relevant. I don't say relevant, but that one is more germane to me because of where I used to live. But like Breonna Taylor to me is an interesting case as far as you're concerned, because I remember for the longest time that was your go-to example for like leftist disinformation, that, the idea that she was shot in her sleep. The fact that I don't think she was in bed. She was in the hallway, wasn't she?
Yes.
Okay. I don't think that substantively changes.
So here's why it was, okay? And I hate to put you on the spot. I'm only doing this to prove a point, and it's nothing personal about you. But like, do you know how the shooting started with the Breonna Taylor incident?
If I remember, and let me articulate this, you correct me if I'm wrong, if that didn't the boyfriend had a gun.
Yeah.
And he shot first, didn't he? Because the door was broken open.
The cops broke the door open, and then the boyfriend fired the first round, and then the cops returned fire.
Right.
So there's so much to talk about regarding no-knock warrants, regarding how the investigation was handled, regarding whether the cops gave proper notice, should they have been wearing body cams giving notice in a no-knock raid. Like, there are so many great conversations to have around that. But that story of the cops no-knocked their way into a house, a boyfriend fired back, then the cops returned fire, is such a different story than cops broke into a room and killed a nurse in her sleep trying to get her ex-boyfriend. It's such a different story, because that first one, I think the first one, presented correctly, is one that Republicans should be on. I'm a huge believer in self-defense, even against cops.
Castle doctrine.
Yeah, 100%.
Like that, yeah.
And if you've got people breaking into my fucking house, I should have the Second Amendment right to protect my property, my girlfriend. Like, that's a family value Second Amendment case that I think, presented in the right way, every Republican would agree, yeah, this is fucked up. And other people have walked. There was a black man that walked recently, around the same time as the Kyle Rittenhouse thing. I think he shot and killed a cop that broke into his house doing a no-knock warrant, and he was completely exonerated on self-defense.
Yeah.
But when the story is presented so dishonestly, and you've got people that are so dug in with so much moral conviction, and they don't even agree on the facts of the matter, like, it only takes 2 or 3 things to like set your mind in a certain way, and then you're done. Like, if you have, honest to God, if you have one bad experience with a Middle Eastern looking person, that might be enough to leave you jaded. If you have 2 or 3, like, it's over, When we're talking about media stories, I can give you 2 or 3 different stories that will set your mind down a certain direction, and it's not 2 or 3. It's hundreds, maybe even thousands over the course of years. You can go through and read 5 or 10 headlines, in 1 minute on Twitter that will reinforce your point of view without ever knowing the facts of the matter.
Well, I mean, all that's very true. I mean, that's the basis for a lot of like enforced stereotypes that people, live, is the idea that they had, or somebody they know had a bad, I mean, my God, Liam Neeson, I don't know if you recall, a couple of years ago, caught a lot of public
said something
flack.
Stupid about something, a daughter dating a black person, or what was it?
He had a friend who was either raped or sexually assaulted during the Troubles in Ireland. I mean, this was decades ago. And because he was, the question was posed to him, you play these violent figures here lately since Taken on out, so authentically. What's your method? How do you get into the mind? Because you seem so gentle. And he opened up and told this very personal anecdote, and he caught a lot of flack for it. And certainly it was a scary thing it was certainly a horrifying thing to hear, but he acknowledged it. He was like, look, this happened to a friend of mine, so I went out looking for trouble, and he said his goal was to find a black person, get into a fight, and potentially kill them.
Yeah.
And he said it was horrible, it was disgusting, it was blah, blah, blah. So he owned it very explicitly, even as he told the story. And for a while, he was persona non grata in Hollywood. And I remember thinking at the time, like, that was very, I mean, certainly what he wanted to do was the biggest overreaction, but it was also 30 years ago, and he number one, never did it. Number 2, acknowledged that it was an extreme overreaction. It was disgusting. He was very unequivocal. So, and I was saying at the time, and I still believe this, you need to offer people roads to redemption. I think you made that case fairly well with Kyle Rittenhouse against Sam Cedar. Like, look, I'm not excusing it, but I understand why he has become a right-wing darling, because, when you drive, when one side of the political spectrum seems like or when you get the impression, because I don't know if people would be receptive to us. Certainly, Kyle Rittenhouse at least has the perception that the left would never offer him redemption, and so he's going to swing his sail to the right. Now, I would argue that doesn't excuse Kyle Rittenhouse, becoming a TPUSA stooge. It just makes it understandable. It doesn't excuse
but I
it,
think
makes
that's that's because people are looking for moral justification when I'm just asking for compassion and understanding. Because the moral justification, we don't all live that way, unfortunately, and that's a high calling, right? We wouldn't expect everybody to be as virtuous as possible. I don't think 99% of people can handle that. And then what you're talking about here, especially with Rittenhouse, goes back to what I said before, that like when I have a conversation with somebody, like if anything, if it is a debate, like my goal is to provide like a really soft landing pad. If you are going to agree with me on something, that's awesome, that's cool, and we can explore it, and maybe I can address some things related to it. And I don't even need you to admit that you agree with me, or you admit that you're wrong, or concede a point. Like, that's not my goal for the conversation. I just want you to feel like you have some safety in being able to explore an idea without me jumping down your throat for it. Because if you are going to push, and I try to push both sides on this, like the extreme left right now is extremely left, and they are pushing the right extremely far right. But the left is as extremely left as they are because the right has pushed so hard in the past. And I think that that pendulum swing back and forth of people pushing on each other like is really explanatory for why people are getting dug in so much harder on each side. It's because of like pushes that you can find echoing from the past.
Well, and you said this during your conversation with President Sunday too, and I mean, certainly that's true, but I don't think it, because you made the comment, and it is technically true, that there are leftist advocates who, based on either what they advocate for or more importantly, how they advocate for it, may be driving people away to extremism. That is that is unquestionably technically true. I just don't think that makes, that's not, I think the implication that Sunday got, and it was even the implication that I struggled with, and I certainly am more of a fan of your content by far than he is, which is, it seemed the suggestion to be that a person who goes to the extreme right because of how certain leftists advocate, that they're morally justified in doing so, when the reality is that if Keffels, or, and again, I'm not too familiar with her, but or Vosh or somebody I'm more familiar with, if they advocate for things that's inefficacious and it drives people away to the right, that's bad because of the outcome. They should be advocating for things. We should all be advocating for things in a way that is the most effective. So somebody could persuade me, for example, that, you know, I made a joke that if hand jobs were votes, I would constantly have sticky hands, because I don't really care what needs to be done as long as the outcome, you know, as long as it's not like an unethical thing. You know, I don't care if you go hard on conservatives or go soft on them like your approach is. Whatever delivers or stands the best chance of getting the results of de-radicalizing people. I always look. Yeah. Well, I always looked at it as that there was like a space for both of these things. That there was the, you know,
there can
the aggressive approach and the soft approach, because it seems to work for the right. I mean, the right seems to enjoy quite a bit of support because you have people like Ben Shapiro and Crowder and Trump, these boisterous, aggressive, facts don't care about your feelings, fuck you if you disagree with me, snowflake. That it makes me wonder.
It depends on where these guys can pull people from the center, maybe, that are really undecided. Somebody like Crowder and Ben Shapiro especially, because these guys aren't as radical, right? But the more radical you go on the spectrum, the shorter reach you have, right? Like somebody like Shapiro or Crowder are never converting a communist. They're never bringing somebody from far left, a progressive, over to like their position. It has to be.
But actually, no. So I'm not a communist, but I've always considered myself very left, and certainly I voted that way. But I went through a phase where I was kind of, it was before I knew about you and Packman and Cedar and whatnot. It was 2018. I went through a right-wing centristy contrarian phase online and in public and private, where I would fixate on these bullshit issues like the Liam Neeson example and whatnot, and AOC was a joke to me and all these things. And I completely ignored everything President Trump was doing at the time, because in my mind, well, I didn't vote for President Trump. There's no way in hell I was going to vote for him the next time around. But I already knew that, conceded that, and so I was just going to skip over it. And so I fixated on policing the left from the left in my social circles and, you know, on message boards online and in like my online community, stuff like that. And Shapiro and even Dave Rubin, that's embarrassing, but it's true. Jordan Peterson, all these people carried a great deal of clout with me because I didn't see any leftist analog to them. I remember telling friends like, God damn, where is my left-wing Ben Shapiro? And little did I realize that you guys were out there, but the algorithm wasn't feeding you all to me. Like, I'd only heard of Cedar eventually because he made a bunch of videos dunking on Jordan Peterson, and it pissed me off.
Yeah, and I think I've heard that story a lot too. That like there might be different avenues through which we can do what we do, and that like a show of power or a show of force. That's what I capitalized on in my early political days, like 2016 to 2018. Not really, 2016 maybe to 2020, was that like I'm supposed to be like the strong man of the left. They can be like the Ben Shapiro or the edgy, you know, argumentative person, probably to 2019 or whatever. And I think that does work for some people. I think that is a way that it can work on some people. But I think that the empathetic or compassionate route can work on every single human. Like, I think you have to be inhuman to.
Why do you think the right is so successful with these figures compared to the left? Because Ben Shapiro's popularity, I think, has only grown, and so is Crowder's. And I mean, my God, they dominate the space. You know, there is no.
In some ways, I think it's like. In some ways, I think it has to do with the types of positions that both people inhabit, but it would be hard for me to know that without like having a bigger background in sociology or history. Like if on the left we're talking about like progressive ideas and diversity and being empathetic towards more people, it seems like that would lend itself towards kind of softer people than people on the right that are more like individualistic or community focused, et cetera, right? It just seems like those types of communities would produce those two different types of people in general.
So, so you think maybe it's a combination of the number one, a certain type of person is predisposed to
Certain types of political
facts don't care about your
ideologies.
feelings.
Yeah. Like if I were to take a whole consortium of debaters, and like I had like on one end it was vegans and on the other end it was just pure meat eaters, I would imagine the pure meat eaters are going to produce a certain type of debater that's going to be fundamentally different in character, or not in character, I'm sorry, in personality than the vegan debaters, right? Just because of the types of people that lend themselves to those arguments.
Well, if you've moved from that position of being the leftist analog to Ben Shapiro and whatnot, again, like the going in, swinging hard and whatnot, is it because you're in a different place in life, or you look back and go, that was a mistake, or you look back and say, no, that was appropriate at the time, but
I don't think it's the best way to get somebody to where I want them to go.
Gotcha.
And I don't think that, like, if I could produce an army of mini-me's, because as an online figure that has the ear of a lot of people will look up to me and they'll emulate, at the very least, my behaviors, if not attempt to emulate my character. If I could send into the world a bunch of people that were ready to scream down and super debate, bro, and argue with people, versus sending out a bunch of people in the world that were empathetic and compassionate, I'd much prefer the latter group of people than the former. One, because I think the latter group is ultimately more politically effective, but more importantly, because I think the character of that latter group is better than the character of the former group.
Fair. Well, no, look, man, listen, I appreciate you talking to me about all this. I know we went on a gazillion different topics, but I find them interesting. Again, I value you as a brake check on aspects of the left that you find repugnant, and I also like that kind of tension back and forth with people like me are trying to nudge you to, in certain contexts, be a bit more aggressive or a bit more like old Destiny in certain contexts.
And I think there's a time and a place for that, like given like the opportunity to, if you put me in front of a really aggressive debater, like a Ben Shapiro type maybe, and with the right topic popping up, like it's fun for me to do that. I enjoy that. I like to roll around in the mud, shit on people. Like that was kind of like what my Twitter used to be for. It was an outlet to just go wild because it's super enjoyable and it can be politically effective in certain ways. But like, I think that overwhelmingly, I don't think that's what's needed right now in the country. I think there's a lot of people that can do that. And I think there's a lot of demand for those types of things, but I don't find many people that are willing to genuinely bridge like the left and the right in like a more empathetic or compassionate way. There's people that give lip service to it, but almost all of those people end up inhabiting this gamer bro politics ground where they're like, oh yeah, we want to bridge divides and we question everything, but they're really just anti-establishment, like anti-shills who will just say whatever is like against like any of the establishments or any of the mainstream opinions. And it's like, yeah, I wish that ground could be inhabited by people of a better or higher quality character.
Fair enough. Well, man, you keep doing what you're doing. It's obviously very successful. I'm sure I will bug you about other shit, especially as we get closer to midterms. When you get a second, as you guys are like settling back in, and I'll send you the link to it again, you should really check out the this upcoming Supreme Court case. It's going to be the oral arguments are going to be had Moore v. Harper. Could be a huge game changer electorally, going back to us talking about the Electoral College and gerrymandering and all these things like this. I know we hype up every like Supreme Court case, but I think most people, at least most legal experts, would say that the implications for this are even more sweeping than the Dobbs decision, which overturned Roe. So I'll send it to you. Just kind of peruse at your leisure if you get some time.
Yeah, I gotcha. I shot something back at you. I think this is like a new like required reading. I think everybody should read this essay given the opportunity to, because I think it highlights a lot of the issues with how disconnected we are in associating with each other in society at the moment. But yeah,
I'll check it out, man.
All right. What do you prefer to link the most? TikTok, Twitter? Give me a social media.
It is probably, I could do my link tree if that's fine. Sure. I'll drop it to you. It's at Ruminate, again, RUM #1 N8. And I'll send you the link, and if you could drop that, I would appreciate it, man.
Yeah, sure. I would say in the future, I don't have any numbers to back this up, and I could be wrong. This is just intuitively based on my understanding of online business. Given the opportunity to link something to an audience, I think it's better to drive them towards a one-click thing, so like a YouTube channel to subscribe, than a link tree, because this is a really weird like internet marketing thing. But when there's 2 clicks versus 1, you can lose like 88% of your engagement. It was like some crazy number for something stupid, but yeah.
Then I would do just @ruminate on TikTok, because that's where I've got the biggest audience. I don't want to brag, but I've got like a 1/100th of your YouTube followers on like TikTok. So
Okay, gotcha. No problem.
it's @ruminate, RUM1N8. And again, appreciate you doing this. I sent you the link, and I'll talk to you later, man.
Cool. I appreciate the conversation, man. Have a good one.